book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Measuring What Counts, the Global Movement for Well-Being by Joe Stiglitz, Jean-Paul Fitoussi, and Martine Duran. And this is from the first chapter labeled Overview. The high-level expert group on the measurement of economic performance and social progress, also known as HLEG, builds on the analyses and recommendations of the 2009 Commission on the Measurement of Economic Performance and Social Progress, also known as the Stiglitz-Sen-Fitoussi Commission, in highlighting the role of well-being metrics in policy and encouraging a more active dialogue among economic theory and statistical practice. The report makes explicit the often implicit assumptions hidden in statistical practices and their real-world consequences. Its central message is that what we measure affects what we do. If we measure the wrong thing, we will do the wrong thing. If we don't measure something, it becomes neglected, as if the problem didn't exist. There is no simple way of representing every aspect of well-being in a single number in the way GDP describes market economic output. This has led to GDP being used as a proxy for both economic welfare, like people's command over commodities, and general welfare, which also depends on people's attributes and non-market activities. GDP was not designed for this task. We need to move beyond GDP when assessing a country's health and complement GDP with a broader dashboard of indicators that would reflect the distribution of well-being in society and its sustainability across the social, economic, and environmental dimensions. The challenge is to make the dashboard small enough to be easily comprehensible, but large enough to summarize what we care about the most. The 2008 crisis and its aftermath illustrate why a change in perspective is needed. The GDP loss that followed the crisis was not the temporary one-off event predicted by conventional macroeconomic models. Its effects have lasted over time, suggesting that the crisis caused the permanent loss of significant amounts of capital. Not just machines and structures, but also hidden capital in the form of lower on-the-job training, permanent scars on young people entering the labor market during a recession, and lower trust in an economic system rigged to benefit a few. Different metrics, including better measurements of people's economic insecurity, could have shown that the consequences of the recession were much deeper than the GDP statistics indicated, and governments might have responded more strongly to mitigate the negative impacts of the crisis. If, on the basis of GDP, the economy is perceived to be well on the road to recovery, as many governments believed in 2010, one would not take the strong policy measures needed to support people's living conditions suggested by metrics that inform on whether most of the population still feels in recession. Nor would one take measures to bolster the safety net and social protection in the absence of metrics on the extent of people's economic insecurity. These failings in the policy responses to the crisis were compounded by overly focusing on the consequences of public spending in raising government's liabilities, when this spending could take the form of investment, increasing the assets in governments and countries' balance sheets. The same follows when measures of unemployment do not reflect the full extent of a country's unused labor resources. The beyond GDP agenda is sometimes characterized as anti-growth, but this is not the case. The use of a dashboard of indicators reflecting what we value as a society would have led, most likely, to stronger GDP growth than that actually achieved by most countries after 2008. This book also looks at progress in implementing the recommendations of the Stiglitz-Sen-Fitoussi Commission since 2009, identifying areas that require increased focus by statistical agencies, researchers, and policymakers. The UN Sustainable Development Goals, agreed by the international community in 2015, clearly go far beyond GDP. But their 169 policy targets and more than 200 indicators for global monitoring are too many to guide policies. Countries will have to identify their priorities within the broader UN agenda and upgrade their statistical capacities, which, even in developed countries, are insufficient to monitor whether the agreed-upon commitments are being met. The international community should invest in upgrading the statistical capacity of developing countries, especially in areas where country data are needed to assess global phenomena, such as climate change or the world distribution of income. Inequality in income and wealth has today a central role in policy discussions in ways it did not in 2009. But important progress is still needed in a range of areas, such as measuring what happens at both ends of the income distribution, integrating different data sources, and measuring the joint distribution of income, consumption, and wealth at the individual level. When looking at inequality, it's also important to look at differences between groups. These are called horizontal inequalities, at inequalities within households, and the way resources are shared and managed, which are especially important in the case of wealth. We should also look beyond inequality in outcomes to inequality of opportunity. Inequality of opportunity is even more unacceptable than inequality of outcomes. But the operational distinction between the two is fuzzy, as we don't observe all circumstances that shape people's outcomes and are independent of their efforts. The book Measuring What Counts by Joe Stiglitz and friends. Thank you. So we've got a new video up for regular supporters of our program over at thomhartmann.com, and this is about just a totally bizarre story about these three guys with no VA experience, not even veterans, who are all big shots down at Mar-a-Lago, that Donald Trump has put in charge of the Veterans Administration functionally. And their association, one of them is the head of Marvel Entertainment, their association with Johnson & Johnson and the New York Stock Exchange, and Johnson & Johnson, the big drug company, taking this very, very cheap chemical, ketamine, tweaking the molecule a little bit and rolling it out as a new anti-suicide drug, Spravato, that in clinical trials caused 6 people to die, 3 of them by suicide, and none of the people taking the placebo to die. And now Trump is telling the VA, you have to buy this highly inflated price drug from Johnson & Johnson, and the Democrats want to know what's up with the VA crowd guys. Check it out. It's at thomhartmann.com.
Thank you.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Hey, TGIF, Shabbat Shalom, Juma Mubarak, whatever it may be for you. Happy Friday. The news is just relentless, and the Trump BS, and now you've got the right wingers and the DeVos family and these other right wing billionaires funding these right wing groups that are going out into the streets saying, it's like snowflakes, right? We can't handle being locked up for, being in our houses for a week or month or 3 months or whatever. Oh, poor conservative snowflakes. The big question, though, that the media is asking is why. I caught the last hour of Joe Scarborough's show this morning, Morning Joe, and he seemed to be seriously troubled by this. Why is it that right-wing billionaires are funding protests of shelter-in-place orders in the states, including against Republican governors? Now, the largest protest, of course, was against a Democratic female governor. And, the groups that show up are notoriously misogynistic and racist and all that kind of stuff. But still, why? Why is it that Fox News is pushing so hard? To reopen the economy? Why would Rupert Murdoch or Lachlan Murdoch, the billionaire owners of Fox News, be pushing this so hard? You get, Dr. Phil, the disgraced shrink who lost his license for inappropriate relationships with his clients on Fox News going, a few people might die, but no big deal. I mean, literally not saying that, but the effect of it. Why is it that these TV doctor pundits over on Fox News are saying that, 2 or 3% of the population dies, that's acceptable? When Dr. Oz said that, there was all this blowback, and he came back and he said, because he was talking about the children can go back to school, and he came back and he said, 2 or 3% of the kids aren't going to die. No, probably not. It'll probably be, a 1/10 of 1%. Instead, they'll take the disease home to their parents and their grandparents, and 2% of their parents are going to die, and 20% of their grandparents are going to die. I mean, why are these people saying this? Why are they doing this? Why are they willing to sacrifice our elders and our vulnerable Americans? Over 35% of Americans are obese. That is the outside of being elderly, being, in a nursing home basically, that is the largest risk group right now. Overweight and hypertension and diabetic. That is the largest risk group. That's not just old people. That's 39% of Americans. The old people are only 16% of Americans. Why is it that they're willing to sacrifice these people? Is it possible that the reason that these right-wing billionaires are pushing these efforts is because any more stimulus packages are going to drive the national debt up to the point where even Republicans are going to have to agree that it's time to raise taxes on billionaires? I mean, I can't come up with a more direct and simple answer than that. Why else would they not care about public health? Why would they put the economy above public health? Well, I think it's fairly obvious. If this country, every month that this country is shut down is going to require about $2 trillion of stimulus to keep us going. It's just that simple. And where's that $2 trillion going to come from? Ultimately, it's going to come from taxes paid by billionaires. And they know it. And if there's one thing right-wing billionaires don't like, it's paying taxes. Over the years, they've managed, they got LBJ to drop the top tax rate from 91% down to 74%. And then they got Reagan to drop it all the way down to 25%. It's down now. A lot of them are paying 22%. Billionaires pay less in taxes than do working people on the bottom half of the wage scale. Working people making $8 an hour pay more in taxes than billionaires in America. And the billionaires want to keep it that way. I don't know. Do you have an answer to why they are doing this? I think follow the money is, the advice that Mark Felt, Deep Throat, gave to Woodward and Bernstein is always it's always good advice. Follow the friggin' money. Yesterday, I posted a tweet on Twitter, and I want to more and more kind of step back from the general craziness. This weekend, I'm going to try and just take a fast, or at least on Saturday, take a fast from the news and just read a novel, take a bath, go for a walk, enjoy nature. I think I'm going to try to do that. I've just been up to my eyeballs in this stuff for a couple of months now, and of course it's my job to do this. But I think that for all of our mental health, it's a good idea if every now and then we back off. And this tweet that I posted yesterday got a huge response over on Twitter. You can go over to my Twitter feed. It's Thom_Hartmann, THOM_Hartmann with 2 N's. And what I wrote was, and this came out of Louise and I took a walk, again down the Columbia River, and it's on the takeoff and landing pattern for the airport here in Portland. And if you walk briskly, you walk about 3 miles in an hour. You walk, that's a good brisk walk is 3 miles an hour. And our walk was about 40 minutes. We walk about 2 miles. And I didn't see or hear a single plane land or take off. And as we're walking along the river, I looked up at the sky, and there was literally not a single contrail in the sky, not a single jet vapor trail in the sky. And Louise and I were talking about how this was like when we were kids. And so this is what I tweeted. I tweeted, not a single jet vapor trail in the sky above Portland today. I remember being 5 years old, laying in a hammock in our backyard in Lansing, Michigan, watching a single jet carving a long arc across the sky. It was 1956, and there was as little air traffic in 1956 as there is today. A statistic, by the way, I got from NPR yesterday. And then I asked the question, what do you remember? And got just some of the most beautiful responses. People talking about June bugs and warm summer nights and butterflies, lots and lots of butterflies and honeybees, and people just remembering life. Remembering what the world was like, before this, the recent insanity of Trump and coronavirus and all that stuff, but also the last 20 or 30 years of population pressure and global warming and the insect holocaust and all that. So, I toss that out there if you want to share some of, your memories that you think are important. The Governor J.B. Pritzker yesterday announced that the Midwest governor, Trump did his press conference yesterday. I was so pissed off by it, I dropped the F-bomb in a text message to one of my employees. Or one of my colleagues, one of the people who works with me on this show. And it was just like, I just can't do it. I can't watch this guy anymore. So anyhow, as Trump is saying that he's going to take all the praise for any opening of the economy, but all the blame is going to go to the governors. That was the essence of what he said yesterday. And Governor Pritzker of Illinois announced that he, Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan, Mike DeWine of Ohio, Tony Evers of Wisconsin, Tim Walz of Minnesota, Eric Holcomb of Indiana, and Andy Beshear of Kentucky, two of them Republicans, announced they're going to work in close coordination to reopen the economy in the Midwest. We are seeing these regional partnerships, come about, which is, I think a good thing. Anyhow, I've got a huge pile of news here for you. We'll be going through it as we continue through the next 2.5 hours, 2 hours and 45 minutes. We'll be back. It's Anything Goes Friday also.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, why do you think that these right-wing billionaires are funding these modern Tea Party revolts? And welcome back, Robbie in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Robbie, what's up?
Hey, just wanted to point out some of the hypocrisy that I'm seeing with the Republicans. Typically, all these Republicans that are, they have, as you had mentioned, they're literally saying that people are going to die. They're expecting it. They want it. They said it was patriotic. How can they call themselves pro-life?
Yeah, really. It is,
The moment, I was just going to say, the moment it's like, it affects their, it costs them money, then they're all of a sudden, like, oh, well, go die for your country, with this, anyway.
Right.
I just wanted to point that out. But also the U.S. Army and FEMA haven't been doing anything except stealing medical supplies. Why do you think that is?
I think that Trump is building up a stash to give to the red state governors. And, that's his plan, in my opinion. I really think that he's very, very concerned that, he knows. He's got actual scientists advising him. He's got Anthony Fauci there. He knows
right.
that these red states are going to get wiped out, the ones that are not doing shelter in place.
It seems to me like this is a plan for their fascist takeover. This is how they're creating discourse amongst us. It's a genocide on poor people. The whole reason why it's affecting black communities is because of the poverty associated in the hospitals themselves there. And it's what I see is they're pushing forth this agenda, killing poor people.
Well, that's the second possible reason why they're doing these protests. These protests are exclusively, almost entirely white men, young white men. And, that it may well be that the statistics are in. This was my rant last Friday. I've revisited it a couple times this week, that it almost seems like they're very happy with that. And not almost seems, it does seem like they're quite happy with the fact that the people who are dying are the older, the boomers and people of color by and large. Black people, 70% of the deaths in Michigan and Georgia and Louisiana, but they're 15 more or less percent of the population. This is you could argue that this is genocide. This is giving infected blankets to the Indians kind of stuff. So I'm not going to discount that at all, Robbie.
The end game is what I'm really concerned about, which is a vaccination, a mandatory vaccination and an ID chip, which is going to determine whether you've been vaccinated or not. I feel like this is kind of pushing forth that end game agenda that all conspiracy theorists are really scared about, and they've been ranting about it. It really is coming true, though. I mean,
we'll see. I think it's more likely that these guys have bought into the herd immunity theory. In fact, they're still, some of these conservatives are still using that phrase, herd immunity. And what they want is the red states are going to get all exposed, and then people are going to be sick, and then the people are going to get over it. And now they're the immune ones, and they're going to be the last ones standing, sort of like, the end of the turnaround.
Can I tell you my last prediction? I got a prediction. It's going to happen this week. Got a prediction for you. Trump and the Republicans are going to start blaming the coronavirus on the Chinese and get compensation from them.
Oh, he's already blaming it on them, and now he's referring to Joe Biden as Beijing Joe. I mean, this is what's coming up next. Yeah, Robbie, I think you're right. Thanks a lot for the call. We'll be back. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. By the way, we're pushing out a new version of our app, of the Thom Hartmann app. This is only with iOS. The version for non-Macintosh or non-iPhones, for other phones. That version is not changing, but the Mac version, the iOS version, the developer that we had that did the former one has gone out of business and can't update it. And so we hired a new developer who's right in the same building we're in, actually. And they just did a marvelous job. But you may have to, when your software updates or if you download this, you may have to log back in again to have access to our podcasts. So just an FYI on that. Some people have been asking, what's going on? Well, that's what happened, and it's just to keep the information coming to you. The New Mexico governor's office. This is insane. The Santa Fe New Mexican, right? The newspaper in Santa Fe. Is reporting, well, actually, let me back up a little bit. There was a tweet from a spokesperson for the governor. The tweet's author, his name is Trip Stelnicki, and he's the chief spokesperson for Michelle Lujan Grisham, who is the governor of New Mexico. And his tweet says, "You don't have to ask the death cult their opinion or publish their quotes. False equivalence now is actually life or death. There is no both sides to this. There is one group preaching accelerated illness and death because they love business. And if you can't see through that," now that was his tweet. So the Republican Party comes out in New Mexico and demands an apology, saying this is absurd, offensive, and disgusting, these characterizations of Republicans. And so the governor's office points out to the Santa Fe New Mexican, the newspaper, that the tweet does not reference any person, any group, any organization specifically by name. If someone seems to think it's about them, I'd say they've placed that upon themselves. Right, death cult people. Meanwhile, speaking of the death cult, this is just an amazing story. This is from the Times of Israel, timesofisrael.com. This is published in Israel, right? This is Israeli news. I'll just read it to you. U.S. intelligence agencies alerted Israel to the coronavirus outbreak in China in November, Israeli television reported Thursday. According to Channel 12 News, the U.S. intelligence community became aware of the emerging disease in Wuhan in the second week of November and drew up a classified document. U.S. intelligence informed the Trump administration, quote, which did not deem it of interest, end quote. But they did tell Israel, and they did tell NATO in November. It's incredible. Meanwhile, chew on this one. Bloomberg reported yesterday, and I quote, "During the first 10 days of the federal government's small business rescue program, the spigot was wide open in Nebraska. Firms there got enough money to cover about 3/4 of that state's eligible payrolls. It was a different picture in New York and California, where companies received less than a quarter of their share. Nebraska, of course, has 2 Republican senators, a Republican governor, Republican members of the House of Representatives. New York and California have Democratic governors and senators. There may be a Democrat representing Nebraska, but, would be in a minority. So Representative Jackie Speer, a Democrat from California, tweets, she retweets the Bloomberg report and adds her thoughts. She says, "I'm hard-pressed not to think that this is political. Blue states like California got a pathetic number of loans issued. Nebraska got nearly 75% of loans requested. I smell a rat with orange hair." Yeah. And again, this is the reality, right? The right-wing billionaires are pushing the movement, and the movement is pushing to reopen the states. So the pressure's on in some of the red states. Ron DeSantis has announced today that he's going to be opening beaches again soon in Florida. You've got some, the Kristi Noem, the Republican governor of South Dakota, is like, we're not going to lock down the state, even though we've got the biggest hot spot in the entire United States, with the Smithfield packing plant, which, by the way, is owned by a Chinese company. This is pork for export to China, by and large. Well, it may be actually, probably a lot of it is consumed in the United States, but it's owned by a Chinese company. So Trump, seeing that the red state governors are getting ahead of him on this thing, goes out yesterday and says, I'm going to allow, he used that word, allow, I'm going to allow the governors to open their states on their own schedules. Every state is different, we're going to let the governors do it. So if a governor opens their state, Trump gets credit for it. And if it works out badly and, the virus explodes across the state and they have to shut it back down again, Trump can blame the governor. I mean, it's heads I win, tails you lose. It's just incredible. And as I said, it ignores the vulnerable. The obese is 39% of the U.S. population. Over 65 is 16% of the population. And Trump's plan has nothing in it about testing or quarantining or contact tracing, which are the actual things that are being done by countries like Denmark and Germany and Austria that are actually starting to very slowly reopen their economies. Because they can, because they have testing in place. But we don't have testing in place in the United States. You still can't get a test. Yes, we've done a couple of million tests in the United States. We've done a lot of tests. We have 330 million people in the United States. We're going to have to be people who are in contact with the public. We're going to have to be testing them, regularly. We should be testing healthcare workers every single day. We should be testing cops and firefighters and EMTs every single day, so that, when one of them becomes infected, they don't become the vector for 50 of them to be infected. But then you got Kristi Noem going, Americans have given up their liberty. We can't have the government paying for these things. Eventually, the taxes on billionaires are going to go up. Unless you've got a better theory. Is it genocide? Is it that, hey, it's mostly hitting poor people and black people? Oh, well, that's
You're
okay.
listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Say the physically fit right-wing white billionaires. Is that what's going on? I got to tell you about the New York Times, too. We'll get into that in the next hour. Stick around.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Our book today is by Catherine Bailey. It's A Castle in Wartime, One Family, Their Missing Sons, and the Fight to Defeat the Nazis. It's an extraordinary and fascinating book. This is from the prologue. Dateline Innsbruck, Austria, 16 December 1944. Monica calling steamboat. This cryptic announcement, broadcast to Austria over the Voice of America, was received with relief by a handful of people able to decipher it. The coded message signaled that the Allies were still trying to infiltrate agents into Innsbruck to make contact with members of the Austrian resistance. It was 7 o'clock on a winter's morning, the gray old city walled in by snow-covered mountains. A roof of dense cloud hung over the domes and spires, cutting out the sky on the summit of the Nordkette. Towering 7,000 feet above the city, the sheer face of the mountain rose like a wall, blocking the north end of the fine Baroque streets. The illusion of being confined in a small space was maintained in the alleys and passageways in the medieval quarter. On a chill, gloomy day such as this, passing the tall, narrow-fronted Gothic houses, the sensation was of walking along the bottom of a ravine. Thick wreaths of smoke spiraled beneath the clouds. The day before, American planes had bombed the city, killing 259 people. In Herzog Friedrichstrasse, a protective shroud covered the famous golden roof of the balcony designed for Emperor Maximilian in 1500. Beneath the bombed-out buildings, parties of children, drafted in from the villages along the valley, worked to clear the rubble. They were watched by small groups of SS soldiers who stood on the street corners guarding the defusing crews. Forcibly recruited from the nearby concentration camp at Reichenau, it was their job to deactivate the bombs that had failed to explode. The Allies were now convinced that Innsbruck, rather than the Reich capital of Berlin, was where the war was likely to culminate. Recent intelligence reports indicated that Hitler was building an Apfelfestung, an Alpine fortress, Alpenfestung, in the mountains that encircled the city. Blueprints obtained by OSS operatives, the OSS is the forerunner of the CIA, point to a chain of underground factories and armories. It was to this remote, impregnable fortress that Hitler and a coterie of his most fanatical supporters intended to retreat when the Wehrmacht was beaten. From here, they would carry on the fight, defended by elite SS troops and sustained by huge stores of supplies that had been carefully stockpiled in bomb-proof caves. With Hitler holding the high ground, Allied military commanders were predicting that the battle to take the fortress could extend the war by up to 2 years and exact more casualties than all of the previous fighting on the Western Front. In these circumstances, intelligence from Innsbruck, the capital of the Apfelfestung, was suddenly at a premium. Alan Dulles, the OSS station chief in Switzerland, hoped to recruit a network of agents from within the city. Their job would be to supply hard military intelligence and assist the passage of U.S. and British forces when they reached the western border of Austria. But as Dulles recognized, Innsbruck was not fertile ground. That autumn, the Gestapo had arrested all known anti-Nazis. Moving from house to house, the mopping up operation signaled their determination to suppress all resistance operations in an area they looked upon as their last bastion. Soon after midday on 16 December, the U.S. Air Force returned to bomb the city for the fourth time that month. A sharp left rally was executed immediately. After bombs away and a course flown around Innsbruck, the pilot reported. Due to undercast, no visual observation of results were possible. Some hours later, Frau Muttenschuldner, a resident of 47 years, sat down to write in her diary. "It is a black day for Innsbruck," she began. "The old city center has been hit as well as the graveyard. Everyone feared there would be another raid, and sure enough, the enemy bombers came and wreaked their evil. There was no gas or water in the city, and the cemetery was now closed for burials. In the flat, dingy light, the only color was from the fires that had yet to be put out. Fraulein Kummer's photo studio is on fire," Frau Muttenschuldner reported. Vargar's paper warehouse, the stained glass factory at Müllerstrasse, Café Paul in Maximilianstrasse, and Hallensteiner's Gasthaus are all burning. Showers of sparks and burning paper are falling from the warehouse. One would marvel at the eerie beauty of it if it were not such a sad occasion. The raid marked a change of tactic. In addition to dropping 200 tons of bombs, the U.S. planes had dropped thousands of propaganda leaflets. In the coming weeks, they would drop thousands more. These, and the messages broadcast on the BBC's Austrian service, urged the city's inhabitants to rise up and prevent Hitler from making a last stand in the Tyrol. "Tyroleans, we know that you will not permit it. You will see to it that none of the Nazi leaders can hide. We know that already Tyroleans are fighting the Nazis everywhere. Even if the Nazis still feel secure in your country, we know better. You are on our side. But the vast majority of Tyroleans were not on the Allies' side. The Book of Castle in Wartime. Coming up on this week's Science Revolution is Zach Corrigan with Food and Water Watch. Could another zoonotic pandemic be coming? Thomas Lindsay with the Center for Democratic and Environmental Rights is here on the rights of nature and how they may have kept Pennsylvania from industry harm. And Friends of the Earth, Lucas Ross is dropping by on the big oil bailout and how fracking could be next. Plus, Arthur West with the Washington League for Increased Transparency and Ethics is suing Fox So-Called News for endangering Americans by calling the coronavirus a hoax. Can he win? The Science Revolution is available wherever you find your favorite podcasts. Whoa, Donald Trump just tweeted, "Liberate Virginia and save your great Second Amendment. It's under siege. Liberate Michigan. Liberate Minnesota." He's trying to provoke an uprising against Democratic governors? Has he lost his mind? This is absolutely breathtaking. Anyhow, to your calls. It's Anything Goes Friday. So you're up next. Bruce in Columbus, Ohio. Hey, Bruce, what's on your mind?
Well, to answer your question of the day, the billionaires and the Republicans that they own view the loss of even the dollar's worth of economic activity as far more tragic than the loss of human life. Really, if you're not rich, you're expendable. And I think that's the essence of everything.
Yeah, and perhaps the thing that I was missing, I was assuming that the billionaires were upset that they would eventually have to pay taxes to pay for the stimulus, but the flip side of that is that the billionaires got that way by business activity, and business activity is ground to a halt. So a lot of these billionaires are probably seeing their income slow down, and that's got to be flipping them out. Yeah, good point. An excellent point. In fact, thank you, Bruce. I think you're spot on. Jeff in Fort Dodge, Iowa. Hey, Jeff, what's up?
Hi, Tom. How are you this Good Friday? My concern is, Tom, about these meat packing plants here in Iowa and in the Midwest. We find out that plant in Sioux Falls, 85% workforce is immigrants. And here in Iowa, we've had two plants, one in Waterloo, I believe, Tyson, and one in southeast Iowa. They've erupted with coronavirus. I just listened to Governor Reynolds here in Iowa, and she says, well, we talked to them today about kind of relaxing their work requirement rules. So that kind of told me that maybe that these plants were having these folks work when they were ill, because it sounds to me, and now they're rushing testing to all these plants, it looks to me like they should be testing these plants when there's nobody showing up with the coronavirus.
Well, we should be doing that all across the United States. We should be testing everybody.
It looks to me like we're opening the doors here, that all these communities around these plants are just going to pretty soon mushroom into a mushroom cloud of COVID-19.
Yeah. Yes, and then it's going to spread into the communities, and then it's going to spread into even the remote rural areas. You also wonder, why is it exploding like this in meatpacking plants, but it's not exploding in, plastic extrusion factories? And, this is a virus that likes to attach itself to animal proteins, and works through animal metabolic systems. And I'm wondering if it can just survive longer and more easily on the surface of a dead pig. And that's the way it's being spread around the factory. I mean, who knows? I don't know. Or if even, it's possible that hogs are starting to catch the disease and spread it around. But this, the meatpacking plant is after they're dead. I'm assuming the slaughterhouse is somewhere else. So I just don't I don't know what's going on with this, Jeff, but it is very troubling. I'm with you. Thanks a lot for the call. Leonard in Sugar City, Colorado. Hey, Leonard, what's on your mind?
Morning, Tom. Trump is dragging his feet on testing. Do you think that could be because he knows that the situation is a lot worse than what's being reported?
I think that there's a lot of magical thinking going on in Trump's head, and that he doesn't take instruction well, he doesn't learn things well, and that he still thinks that maybe he can just bluff his way through until November. The election's only 200 days away from today. And, that's, he's got to be looking at that, or he is looking at that, saying, okay, how can I get the economy kind of back in shape? And he's got the Fed pouring all this money in. The Dow is up today, or at least it was earlier. I think he is thinking that he can pull this thing off. I think he's badly miscalculating, but he's going to get some good news cycles out of it, and before it all falls apart. But I think that that's a possibility, Leonard. Thanks a lot for the call. Sean in Stamford, Connecticut. Hey, Sean, what's up?
Hi, Tom. How's it going?
Good. What's on your mind?
Yeah. Okay. This is something I've been thinking about for a while, and your article from Israel sort of like cinched it. And I dig into wonder, and I'd like your opinion on this, and start even going down the rabbit hole, that it has this whole thing with Trump botching this whole coronavirus response more a feature than a bug.
Yeah, it may well be. And that's, and because I think I still believe that these guys are operating on the herd immunity theory, which Boris Johnson was operating on until he realized how stupid it was, and as was his health minister, Matt, whatever his name is. And
yeah, I know. For me, because having a psych background, I can pick up on these signs, and I wanted to get your opinion because I thought, it can't just be me thinking this. Someone else got to be saying this too, somewhere.
Yeah. No, I think this is it. I think they think that if they can get enough people infected in red states and on the other side of the, and recovered, that those states can crank back up again before the rest of the country catches up while California is still in lockdown. And, I heard a person on TV this morning use a metaphor. He said, that's like saying that we're going to designate this end of the swimming pool as the place where people can pee. And the rest of the pool, people can't pee in the pool, right? And, it's a perfect metaphor. You say, well, yeah, in South Dakota, they can pee in the pool, but the rest of us in the pool here, we can't. It's nuts. But, that's what they're doing. Mark Taylor Canfield in Seattle. Hey, Mark, what's happening in Seattle?
Hi, Tom. It was good meeting you again in Seattle, so thanks for signing my book, The War on Voting.
Yeah. Nice to see you. What's up?
Well, I'm executive director for a nonprofit news organization. It's called Democracy Watch News. So we've been reporting on the public health crisis, and we had a lengthy press briefing involving journalists all across the country and a conference call for our podcast called Democracy Cast. But I'm also a musician and a composer, and I was actually a resident composer at the University of Washington at one point. So what I decided to do was to compose an orchestral piece called Quarantine Suite, and it's dedicated to all the heroes on the front lines of this pandemic. And then I'm offering it to the community as a free download at SoundCloud. You can also go to YouTube and get it. I was able to work with some musicians remotely to record the piece, so it worked out really well. And I had a chance to work with some really good musicians. But I'm really concerned about the music industry here in Seattle, Tom, because I am a musician. I have a band, too. And I'm watching the Showbox Theater, or the grand old lady here that we've been trying to save for years, the Crocodile, Numos, the Moore Theater. By the way, the Crocodile, I think, was partially owned by Peter Buck from REM at one point. He actually came here to Seattle because he really liked the music scene. And I'm sure a similar thing is happening in Portland, which also loves its music scene, its independent music scene. But a lot of clubs are trying to raise money online, and I'm just really worried, Tom, that after this is over, that some of these clubs are not going to make it, and that the music industry is really going to suffer. Because we know the arts is usually working on a shoestring budget in the United States anyway, unlike when I was in Europe, and, I got to travel and go to festivals that were where my expenses were paid for by the French Ministry of Culture or UNESCO or whatever. Here in the United States, it's really hard for musicians and artists of all kinds that are out there. And so I'm just hoping that our political representatives will come up with some ideas. I've been talking to Pramila Jayapal about this, our congresswoman, on a couple conference calls. But how do we save the music industry in Seattle? How do we save the music industry in Portland, which is so vital? And I'm wondering what is happening in Portland in terms of the clubs. Are they all closed too? And how are they going to survive?
Yeah, everything's closed here, and it's going to be it is a very, very, very difficult time for these businesses, for the music scene, for people, and particularly for musicians who were basically gig workers. In fact, many of them making so little that they're not filing taxes and things, and as a consequence of that, they're probably not getting the $1,200 check, and they may not get future checks. So it is a big issue that something should be done about it. And then, in one of Trump's rallies yesterday or the day before, his TV rallies, he was saying, the Democrats, they put money for the Kennedy Center in the stimulus bill. Well, yeah, it was a few $1 million, and it was because the Kennedy Center is owned by the federal government. And so you have to maintain your damn properties even if they're not being used. And and you want to keep your employees, on payroll for future times. But he's complaining about the arts being funded, right? And so, as long as Republicans are in control, as long as Republicans control the Senate, as long as there are any Republicans in the House, as long as there's a Republican in the White House, I'm not holding my breath that anything is going to be done to help the arts, or frankly anybody other than the billionaire class. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's Anything Goes Friday, back with more of your calls in just a moment. It's the Thom Hartmann program, the place where despair is not an option. And welcome back. Asia in Oakland, California. Hey, Asia, what's on your mind today?
Oh, hi, Tom. Thanks for having me on. Oh, well, first I want to thank you for your tweet. Even I'm not on Twitter, but for saying it in your stroll along the Columbia River, because it made me nostalgic for those same times, and also from your book that the Warren Court was around. So there's a lot of uplifting things that happen when you're sitting around and you're quiet and you read and you reflect. And I want to thank you for it. That's all.
Sure. Thank you. Well, thank you, Asia. That's all you wanted to say?
That's all I wanted to say.
Okay. Well, that's very kind of you. Thank you so much for the call. It's nice to hear from you. Mayor in Allentown, Pennsylvania. Hey, Mayor, what's on your mind today?
Hey, I was listening to the Young Turks yesterday, and I was furious. I wanted to call yesterday, but it wasn't Anything Goes. So Anna Kasparian she has been dumping on Elizabeth Warren pretty routinely throughout the campaign, but she's out of the
Mayor. Let me stop you right there. I really don't allow critiques of other shows on this show. If you've got a point you want to make without referencing the Young Turks or Anna Kasparian, feel free to make it. But I don't want to be trashing other people's programming, particularly when I'm not familiar with
I'll make the point without mentioning the name. But I'm hearing, let's just say, I'm hearing people say, why doesn't Elizabeth Warren apologize or address the fact that Joe Biden has sexual abuse allegations against him? And the same people...
He doesn't have allegations. He has one allegation.
Yeah.
From a woman who previously went on television and claimed that she was Vladimir Putin's lover.
Okay. The point is, people are saying, why doesn't Elizabeth Warren address this? But they're not saying the same thing, like, why doesn't Bernie address this? Because he also endorsed Biden. There's this uneven... Right. Can you explain to me, let me put it as a question, can you explain to me why certain Bernie supporters have been so negative toward Warren? Can you explain that to me?
I can't, Mayor, and my best guess would probably be something that would not reflect well on them, and so I'm not going to. Again, back to my thing of not trashing people who aren't here to defend themselves. Mayor, thanks for the call. Tom in Indianapolis. Hey, Tom, what's up?
Hey, Tom, how you doing? This is concerning your question at the top of the show. I thought of two things. Billionaire class, I think they might be afraid Trump won't get reelected if the economy goes south. It's their last chance to clean the rest of the shells, like any social programs that are left. Or it might shine too much sunlight on the inequality they've perpetuated, with the long lines are shown on TV with the cars lined up for food banks. Because one thing they're scared of is the mass of people turning against them.
It's possible. We're all kind of scratching our heads wondering, why would these guys be funding this? Donald Trump certainly thinks it's going to work to his benefit. He's promoting them on his Twitter feed today, and yesterday in his TV rally, he was refusing to say anything bad about them. So, maybe these right-wing billionaires who are so grateful for their tax cuts figure that the best way that they can help Trump and get more tax cuts is to support these uprising movements, as it were. But there's some Republican governors at the crosshairs. Did you know that Ronald Reagan committed treason to become president in 1980, and George Herbert Walker Bush was in on it, and he avoided being prosecuted for this in 1992 with a little help from Bill Barr? It's on page 116 of my book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. So every 5 years, the U.S. Department of Agriculture comes out with new guidelines, and we just put up a video over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program that talks about how the Trump administration, in this insanely corrupt deal with the $100 billion industry of ultra-processed, high-sugar, high-salt, high-fat foods that is literally killing 700,000 Americans a year, has said, we're going to change the guidelines so that these fast food, high-processed food companies can shovel their stuff into our school lunch programs, into our kids. We're going to change the guidelines so people aren't informed about the importance of, dialing back somewhat on meat and on salt and sugar and all these other things. It's nuts. You can check the whole thing out over at thomhartmann.com. Look for the video for our, the supporters of our program at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and Mary in Waterloo, Iowa. Hey, Mary, you have some insight into what's going on with the meatpacking plants?
Yes. We live next door, not close to Tyson here in Waterloo. And what's going on is the farmers are getting lower prices on their cattle and hogs and chickens. But when you go to the grocery store, the prices are the same as 6 months ago. And I think the reason they want to keep these people producing out the door this meat is because they're making a big profit right now. And also, they don't have, like they said, I don't think they're letting these people, if they come to work sick, they're not going to send them home. And if the people don't, if they stay home, they'll get fired. And then also, the government has allowed the chicken producers to manufacturing plants to speed up the lines. So these workers are in a lot of danger cutting up these chickens. But Mr. Grassley said he was going to investigate why the prices in the store, meat prices, weren't lower, and the farmers are getting less price. So I think if these Tyson and all these want to keep these plants running as fast as they can go.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. At the end of the day, usually when Republicans are doing something, it has to do with money. Charles in Miami. Hey, Charles, what's up?
Hey, how you doing, Tom? Quickly, about the farmers, I wanted to figure out why did I hear that farmers was just throwing out their crops instead of donating them? And my original question was, by the Trump administration coming in and cutting regulations and getting rid of some of the Obama era, environmental stuff, has that contributed to people? has it contributed to people, getting sick in those Smithfield farms?
It's entirely possible. I mean, he has dialed back on OSHA, and OSHA is not enforcing the laws the way that they used to. So that's possible. I think that Mary's point that, a lot of these workers are hourly workers. If they don't show up, they don't get paid, and they're desperate to feed their families. Some 85% of them, according to an earlier caller, are people who are not here, who are immigrants to the United States. I don't know if they have visas or if not. But they're hanging on to the edge, I guess would be the way that I would say it. So I think that probably has a lot to do with it, Charles. Thanks a lot for the call. Squiana, am I saying that right, in Houston, Texas?
Shawana Smith, yes. I'm here in Texas.
Hey, Shawana, what's up?
Hi. I'm going to try to short on this and try to make it real quick. I discovered a scam in my community. We have debt collectors coming in, stealing property. I know you probably heard a big scam about these HOAs. Well, I had someone actually foreclose on my home. Then I went and did discovery with the person because I filed a lawsuit against them. It came back that we had a breach before I moved in. So they had no standing. They got in cahoots with Deutsche Bank, who I traced all the way back to Mortgage IT on my home, and found out they have no contract. But they'll go to the courts in Texas, and they're filing these documents with the judges, and the judges are awarding these homes. And I found millions of homes, well, not millions, like thousands of homes in my community that this is happening to, and the people don't know what to do. So just to clarify, your home, before you bought your house, it had been in default, and that default, although probably these were back during the liar loan days, the people who had previously owned it never actually even had a contract for the mortgage. Is that right? Well, actually, not. And actually, it was sold to me through a broker, a builder, who's at the top of all this, called Legend Homes. And what happened, what I found out is they didn't do an assignment from Mortgage IT to the next mortgage company, which is, I had to trace this. This actually followed up under the Obama administration, the mortgage crisis, when they said we're going to have all these homes that's going to come back, and it's coming back to Deutsche Bank, pretty much, who are stating that they own the loans, and they don't.
Amazing.
Yes.
It's not surprising. Go ahead.
Deutsche Bank purchased Mortgage IT. I bought my house from Legend Homes in 2005, who didn't do a correct assignment. Then Mortgage IT closed down without a business. Then the Obama administration came in and sued Deutsche Bank and Mortgage IT for mortgage fraud. And I'm just finding this out around 2013 when I went and started doing my research and tracking back real property. And a lot of people don't understand the value of real property. Then I found out my HOA was a fraud because Legend Homes still tried to create an HOA.
Right. Amazing. I hope you can resolve it and keep us up to date. I wish you the very best on this, and thank you for watching us on Facebook Live, by the way. The grifter's going to grift, and it's just like this is, it was Republican grifters who brought us the crash in 2008, the George W. Bush crash. We've got another Republican president, another crash.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
So we've got a new video up for regular supporters of our program over at thomhartmann.com, and this is about just a totally bizarre story about these three guys with no VA experience, not even veterans, who are all big shots down at Mar-a-Lago, that Donald Trump has put in charge of the Veterans Administration functionally. And their association, one of them is the head of Marvel Entertainment, their association with Johnson & Johnson and the New York Stock Exchange, and Johnson & Johnson, the big drug company, taking this very, very cheap chemical, ketamine, tweaking the molecule a little bit, and rolling it out as a new anti-suicide drug, Spravato, that in clinical trials caused 6 people to die, 3 of them by suicide, and none of the people taking the placebo to die. And now Trump is telling the VA, you have to buy this highly inflated price drug from Johnson & Johnson, and the Democrats want to know what's up with the VA crowd guys. Check it out. It's at thomhartmann.com.
Thank you.
Book Club today, we're reading from Ralph Nader's new book, How the Rats Reformed the Congress, a fable. It's fiction. Chapter 1, Invader. It was one of those uncomfortable morning strategy sessions with his senior staff. For House Speaker Reginald Blamer, the discomfort was in having to figure ways to continue blocking a long overdue raise in the federal minimum wage for many millions of low-income workers when he knew in his gut it was not the right thing to do. We're in the crosshairs, he would say, starting such congressional meetings in his spacious office. Not that his anxiety would cause him to renege on the Book Club today, we're reading from Ralph Nader's new book, Many. Speaker Blamer came from a large family that had lived through tightened circumstances. His father was a tavern keeper and his mother a seamstress. Deep anxiety, however, did have one inherent comfort at such morning gatherings. It tended to work in mysterious ways to overcome his morning constipation, the constant bane of the speaker's existence. Holding down 30 million workers, including among them many conservative voters who, when adjusted for inflation, were making less today than workers in 1968, bothered the very private, self-censored, psychosomatic recesses of the speaker's conscience. And so, not surprisingly, Speaker Blamer felt the onset of a solid bowel movement. He excused himself and repaired to his large private bathroom. As he sat down in the broad porcelain toilet, he felt that the expected discharge would be ample and prompt. No straining today. After quick breaks of wind, the speaker heard a sound inside the toilet, but it wasn't from his bowels. Lifting himself up a bit, he looked down and saw the head of a mostly submerged black rat closely eyeing his bottom. Yow, 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 bellowed the speaker as he straightened up and slammed the cover down. Alarmed, the staff rushed to the bathroom door to respectfully call, Speaker Blamer, are you all right? Do you need help? They dared not open the door. The speaker did not tolerate any exposure of his privacy, especially being seen in his corpulent native suit. Another more normal person might have replied, yeah, I'm okay, it's just that there's a rat in the toilet bowl. But Speaker Blamer was not a normal person. He has had to be super cunning to get to his present situation in life. Being cunning means that you can instantly sense danger, being as alert as, say, a rat. And Speaker Blamer was already imagining the deriding headlines in the late-night show jokes if he disclosed what really prompted his impulsive cries of sheer terror as he leapt from the throne. So he replied, nothing much, boys, just one of those sudden spasms I get once in a while. Sure comes on fast, it goes away fast, too. I'll be right out. Rejoining the staff at the head of the conference table, albeit full of gas and undischarged wastes, the speaker went through the checklist for crushing the hopes of the downtrodden multitudes. His chief of staff reviewed the usual elements of the campaign against workers. First off, the speaker will say, I always thought that if you raise the price of anything, you get less of it. The proposal to raise the minimum wage is a job killer. Good soundbite, said his research assistant. The speaker nodded gravely, but when he heard the word bite, he silently winced. The operations assistant counted off the usual reliable economics professors who could supply objective warnings about losses of jobs in recession. The Fast Food and Big Box Retailer Association had begun a large ad buy on television and radio with the announcers' stentorian voices of dire gravity. The K Street lobbyists were already in action on Capitol Hill, marshaling the corporate PACs to make sure this drive was on the front burner, hinting to legislators that their employers might see this as a litmus test for their donations. Op-eds, letters to the editors, and editorial condemnation of economically disruptive higher wages and layoffs was already in the pipeline. About to burst, the speaker could not wait to end the meeting. Okay, fellows, you seem to have the situation well in hand. It's not the first time we had to fight off this wage grab. Get to work. They all scattered, including an irrelevant intern who wondered to herself whether paying members of Congress would mean the government would end up with less of them. Paying members of Congress more, excuse me. The moment the door to his spacious office closed, the speaker literally lunged to his private toilet, whereupon he unloaded a vast quantity of feces, soft and semi-hard, 3 bursts worth. Before he could enjoy a moment of quiet satisfaction, a shrill shriek lifted him up as his eyes bulged. It was the black rat swimming in the bowl, propelling the terrified cry, yow, yow, yow. Again, he slammed down the toilet seat, kept his hand on the flush toilet handle, gritting his teeth as if to say, on the way to oblivion, you dirty rat. His longtime secretary heard his yell and rushed to his bathroom. Mr. Speaker, what happened? Are you okay? Recovering his composure, he replied, I'm okay, Sarah, just more of those sudden spasms. I've got to get some physical therapy. By the way, did you schedule that fundraiser next week for an hour later? Yes, I did, Mr. Speaker, Sarah replied, sounding very relieved. Arriving home that early evening, he sat down to a healthy diet supper prepared by his adoring wife, Regina. Their 3 children were grown up, living in distant states, so they were empty nesters. You seem unusually agitated, honey, said Regina. Did you have a hard day? It seems every day is hard in these times, he replied, shrugging off her concern. What a great meal always, Regina. Now I need some relaxing reading. Do you know where we put that colorful book of animals that we got as a wedding gift, anniversary gift years ago? Why, yes, Reginald. It came in 3 volumes, Mammals, Reptiles, and Insects. Tell me which one you want, and I'll get it for you. Mammals, he replied. Sitting in his study, the speaker started reading about the rat. The word rat is derived from the Latin rodere, which means to gnaw. Rats produce litter several times a year with high infant mortality. If seen as weak, newborns are eaten by their parents and their stronger siblings. Over the centuries, rats have developed uncanny abilities to survive.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. On the line with us is Professor Richard Wolff, the economist, co-founder of democracyatwork.info, the author of numerous books, his most recent, Understanding Socialism. He also has the website rdwolf with 2fs.com, and his Twitter handle is profwolf with 2fs. And Professor Wolff, welcome back. Last week we were talking about how, I asked the question, what does getting back to normal mean, and what will the new normal be from an economist's point of view? And we really didn't get a chance to get into that answer. So let me ask you that again, and this week we can try to answer it.
Okay, well, let me try. There's a real difficulty here because really no one knows, and the attempt to answer the question shouldn't be interpreted by anyone to understand me to be claiming that I know what is going to happen. The reality is nobody knows. The biggest single problem is a clash, a contradiction, if you like, between the understandable desire of people who have no job and no income, and for whom the check from the government, if even they get it, will only take them a small part of the way to recover what they've already lost, let alone help them in the future. The big question is the tension between wanting to, quote-unquote, get back to work and thereby earn a living and feel good about yourself and support your family and all the rest, versus the fact that the truth is that it isn't safe to do that. You are presenting the vast majority of the American people with an unspeakable choice. Either solve your economic problem, which is increasing its pressure on you literally every day, or take a chance that this disease is rampant, that the people in authority either don't know it or don't want to face it, and that you are going to be taking a risk which would be terrible for you as an individual, but given the fact that this is an infectious disease, means that if you go back, you're risking your spouse, your children, your elderly, your friends, your neighbors, and so forth. Here's the starkest statistic everybody should have in mind. We are a nation of 325-odd million people, and we haven't tested 1 million of them yet. That means we don't know where this disease is. We don't know what the different forms of it may already be. And we can't come up with a reasonable strategy when we are in that level of backwardness, unpreparedness, that one statistic, not that it's the only relevant one, but that one makes clear. And I think our immediate future will therefore be an enormous tension, which we can already see, around going back to work because of the fundamental uncertainties about what that's going to mean.
Yeah, I get it. And so much is going to depend on whether there is a vaccine and how effective that vaccine is. Yep. It's like, the polio vaccine changed the landscape of America. But on the other hand, the flu vaccine, not so much. I mean, it seems to help some people, but it's nowhere near as effective as you would have to mitigate a genuinely deadly disease. Not to say that people don't die of flu every year, but
yeah. Tom, I mean, let me push a little bit. This is the third crash we've had in this young century. We had the dot-com crash in 2000. We had the subprime mortgage crash in 2008, and now we have this. Each time we call the crisis by the name of the trigger, the thing from quote-unquote outside that came in and did us all this damage. I'm an economist. I've got to tell you, it's not the trigger. It's the system that can't handle the trigger. Overpriced stocks, which is what we had with .com in 2000, that's not a new problem. The stock market has overpriced sectors all the time. People failing to cover their mortgages, that's not the first time it happened in 2008. It's the umpteenth time. And this isn't the first viral disaster we've had on our hands. We've had them on and off for at least the last century that we've kept records of. We recently had Ebola and MERS and SARS. I mean, if our economy is so poorly prepared to face these kinds of issues and get through them, it tells you something about a system that isn't robust, that isn't healthy. You can't just blame it on the trigger. Just like we're saying, look, a good number of the people felled by corona were people whose diets weren't so good and who had other diseases perhaps and who had viral troubles in their past. The same is true of an economic system. We get through these things or we don't, and if we don't, blaming it on the thing that triggered it is a bit of a cop-out.
Yeah, one would think.
Yes.
I'm curious if, I know this is the water you swim in, is the world of economics. It seems to me that the more progressive theories that there needs to be a very, very aggressive and strong social safety net. You have to have high taxation of great wealth in order to equalize or reduce inequality. Basically the Scandinavian model as a version of friendly capitalism is growing. There's a new consensus emerging around this, it seems, particularly among so-called conservative Democrats, but even some Republicans. And my sense is that one of the reasons why these right-wing billionaires are helping to fund these protest movements, and Trump this morning tweeting out to three Democratic governors encouraging people in their states to basically take up weapons and liberate the state. In the case of Virginia, he said, his Second Amendment. And he's literally using the word liberate. This could be a call to violence. That the reason why these right-wing billionaires are funding these kinds of movements, the DeVos family in Michigan in particular, is because they don't want to see taxes go up on billionaires. They don't want to see this emerging consensus that, we should be more like Scandinavia. They're far more resilient than we are. They're doing just fine. Their hospitals are not overwhelmed, et cetera. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that this is becoming a very, very dangerous country in which to live, and not only because of the virus. I mean, here's the bottom line: there is no way out of this. It wasn't profitable in this country, where we have the enterprises that could have produced the masks and the gloves and the beds and the ventilators. We know we could have done it. We have the skilled workers. We have the raw materials. It wasn't profitable, so private enterprises didn't do it, which I understand. It isn't profitable to produce lots of masks. It isn't profitable to store them in warehouses and stockpile them judiciously around the country where people might need them. And because our government tends to believe that whatever is good for profit is somehow good for the society, they didn't come in and compensate for what the private capitalists wouldn't do. And so they became, instead of a compensating agency, a complicit agency. And here we are with the worst record on dealing with this virus virtually of any country. This is a problem with capitalism. You cannot rely on the private sector's profit focus if what you want is to take care, for example, of the public's health. You have to have a different motivation. It can't be the profit motive. It has to be, in this case, let's say, the motive of being secure for infectious diseases. And that's a critique of capitalism. There is no way around.
Yeah, absolutely. And so well said and so well seen when we look at our for-profit healthcare system. Professor Richard Wolff, democracyatwork.info, thank you so much for dropping by today. It's always great talking with you.
Okay, Tom, glad to do it.
Have a great afternoon. We'll be back with more of Anything Goes Friday right after this.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And a few rants by me as well. Stick around, it's 15 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Susan in Hood River, Oregon. Hey, Susan, what's on your mind today?
Good morning, Tom. A couple weeks ago, I caught the tail end of you saying that you didn't think that Amy Klobuchar would be a good running mate for Biden. And I was wondering why you think that, and if not her, which woman do you think would be the best?
I think the best woman to be his running mate is, in terms of ideology and electability and whatnot, is probably Elizabeth Warren. I love Stacey Abrams. She has never run in a national campaign, and I'm not certain there. Kamala Harris is really good, but she's got some putting people in jail skeletons in her closet, as it were. I think the reason that I object to Amy Klobuchar is because she's a Bill Clinton neoliberal, and what we need is a progressive. She is definitely not a progressive. She wouldn't call herself a progressive, or if she does, she doesn't really mean it. And although maybe she's having a come to Jesus moment, like so many Democrats are right now around all this, but. And by the way, there was just a poll done that was published, I think it was published over on Daily Kos this morning, that showed that among the American public, the person who is most popular to be Joe Biden's vice presidential running mate right now is Elizabeth Warren. So I think that she would bring the progressives. He's going to bring along the corporate Democrats and the so-called middle-of-the-road Democrats and the independents. And I think between the two of them, that would be a very, very strong ticket. Thanks a lot for the call, Susan. Gustavo in Santa Barbara, California. Hey, Gustavo, what's up?
Hey, good morning, and thank you for everything that you've been doing during these times of hardship. Very quickly, I was wondering if you can explain to all of us the difference between patriotism and nationalism. I'll take it out, off the line. And thanks again.
Yeah, it's a good question. Patriotism is the belief. Patriotism is loving your country and being willing to sacrifice for your country, viewing your country as essentially an extension of your family. Nationalism is believing that your country is better than any other country. And nationalism easily and rapidly devolves into jingoism, into cheap slogans and phony attacks on people who are not sufficiently nationalistic or patriotic. Patriotism rarely does that. Although, the old saying, I don't recall if it was Teddy Roosevelt or Samuel Johnson who said, false patriotism is the last refuge of the scoundrel. But that would be false patriotism. But, great question. Thank you very much. I hope those answers were useful. Molly in Madison, Wisconsin. Hey, Molly, thanks for watching YouTube. What's up?
Hi, Tom. Wanted to let you know my wife is a vegetarian because of you. Long-time listener.
Good.
But what I really called to tell you is one of your callers earlier had talked about the COVID effects on the Seattle and Portland music industry. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to let your listeners know about a way to help Portland gig performers. There is a performers emergency fund, which was started by one of Portland's best entertainers, Storm Large and friends, to help performers pay their bills. And it's gimmeshelterpdx.org. And that's not give me, it's gimme, G-I-M-M-E.
G-I-M-M-E.
gimmeshelterpdx.org.
Okay, pdx.org. Thank you. Thank you for that, Molly. I appreciate it. We'll be back. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. So 2 stories today that raise some interesting possibilities. The first is this story out of Israel that in November, U.S. intelligence agencies notified Israel that this coronavirus was floating around in the area of Wuhan, China, and to get ready. And in fact, even speculated in this memo that our intelligence agency sent to Israel, even speculated about the political consequences of widespread infection in the Middle East when this virus gets there, as it has now. So that was in November, according to Israeli television and Israeli print media. And then this, Hannah Osborne reporting over on Newsweek, Newsweek.com, the headline, coronavirus outbreak may have started as early as September, scientists say. And this is based on looking at the genome of the virus. And they're thinking that it didn't actually start in Wuhan. It started in that state, but it might have started as early as September in a small town near Wuhan and then traveled from that small town into Wuhan. And it's absolutely fascinating. It's they publish their work now in a peer-reviewed journal. As time goes on, we're going to learn more and more about this. But, once again, that would help explain why in November our spy agencies were able to pick this up and share it with Israel and share it with Donald Trump, who, quote, had no interest in the issue, end quote, or words to that effect. But yeah, and speaking of Donald Trump, I mentioned this before, but it really deserves focus. Trump, in all caps this morning, tweeted, "Liberate Minnesota." Minnesota, of course, has a Democratic governor. And then he tweeted, "Liberate Michigan." Michigan, of course, has a Democratic governor. And then he tweeted, "Liberate Virginia and save your great Second Amendment. It is under siege." Liberate and siege are the kind of words that you use when you are trying to mobilize violence, the kind of violence that we call war. It is organized, legalized mass murder. That's war. And we have the President of the United States now, in my opinion, advocating violence against, at the very least, the governors of these states. And if not violence, then what? I mean, these yahoos who showed up yesterday in Michigan, day before yesterday in Michigan, egged on by a group funded in part by Betsy DeVos's family, were carrying semi-automatic rifles and Confederate battle flags. The side that committed treason, the traitors that committed treason against the United States and then lost the war. Right, those losers. These losers in Michigan carrying around the losers flag with guns. So you get a bunch of people who have a very low IQ, very little self-esteem, probably some sort of problems in their relationships, particularly with women, have some bizarre notions about their own racial superiority, and then you get the President of the United States egging them on. It's a prescription for violence. I mean, this goes way beyond Tea Party stuff. The Tea Party was bad enough. Get your government hands off my Medicare, right? And, you know, all the stupidity that was associated with the Tea Party. But this could lead to bloodshed. And there's no doubt in my mind that Donald Trump, psychopath that he is, seems to delight in death and violence. I have not heard him once say words to the effect of, you know, there's 34,000 dead Americans. Every single one of them had family. Or all, you know, almost every single one of them. Family, you know, who are mourning them. Children, grandchildren, siblings, friends, neighbors, coworkers, parents. Every single one of them, or virtually every single one of them, left behind somebody who cared. And instead of reaching out to those people who are in pain, I mean, if there's 34,000 dead Americans, there's hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of Americans whose lives have been impacted by the death of these people in their families, in their social circles, in their neighborhoods, in their workplaces. And we all need to be saying prayers for these people, or reaching out to them, or sending them light, or good vibes, or doing what we can and remembering them. And I've never heard a word about that from Trump, because he doesn't understand empathy. He doesn't do empathy. The only thing he cares about is himself and his daughter. That's it. And her husband. You know, it's a grifter's got to grift with other grifters. Speaking of Trump, the New York Times published an article this morning, When Older Relatives Shrug at Coronavirus Restrictions. And it's got story after story after story of old folks telling their kids, you know, their kids in their 40s and 50s and 60s, their parents in their 70s, 80s, and 90s, telling their kids, I don't worry about the virus. I'm going to go shopping. I'm going to go out to the store. You can't stop me. And the whole article, it's like, you know, this multi-page article by Julie Fingers, is like asking, you know, what's with these people, and could it be the age positivity effect, and could it be they have radical acceptance? And so, and I for the first time ever, I posted a comment on a New York Times article, and my comment was, "This is the Fox effect." Fox's viewership is almost entirely over 60, and most of them over 70. And these are the people that they're writing about in the New York Times, scratching their heads going, why aren't these people taking this thing seriously? They're not taking it seriously because they're watching Fox. And we need to be honest about that as a country and realize that we've got a propaganda arm for the billionaires, for the right-wing billionaires in this country, in Fox, run by a right-wing billionaire, a couple of right-wing billionaires, Rupert and Lachlan, and it's killing us. I mean, even Michael Savage, the right-wing radio host, he came out, he's calling these people the pimps in the right-wing media who tell you what you want to hear. I'll tell you about that in the next hour. We got a lot more news we'll get to, but we'll pick up your calls right after this.
To the Thom Hartmann program. Call 202-808-9925.
Because, of course, it's Anything Goes Friday. We'll be right back. Today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is by Alan J. Lichtman, and it's titled Repeal the Second Amendment, The Case for a Safer America. This from the introduction, titled A Book That Must Be Written. On April 28, 1996, 28-year-old Martin Bryant stopped at an inn near his home of Newtown in Tasmania, Australia, and shot to death its two owners. He then drove to the former penal colony and tourist attraction of Port Arthur, where he lunched at a cafe. After eating, Bryant pulled from his sports bag a semi-automatic rifle with a 30-round magazine that he had legally purchased through a newspaper ad. With no provocation, he began firing at patrons in the cafe and its gift shop. Before the police stopped his shooting spree, Bryant had murdered 35 and wounded 18 others. His motive remains unknown. There were people everywhere, bodies, said witness Lynn Beavis. I thought at the time, being a nurse, I've seen dead people, I've seen blood, I've seen things like this, but what I saw in there, nobody but perhaps a soldier would know what that was like. The leadership of a shocked nation responded to the Port Arthur massacre, not with thoughts and prayers, but with decisive action. The country's conservative-led government rebuffed their gun lobby and its American ally, the NRA, to adopt comprehensive national gun controls. In a 2015 broadside labeled Australia, There Will Be Blood, the NRA charged that those regulations, which Australia significantly tightened as of 2002, have, quote, robbed Australians of their right to self-defense and empowered criminals. If the NRA was right, America, with its lax control over firearms for alleged self-defense, should be one of the world's safest countries, certainly far safer than Australia, where criminals presumably evade gun controls to prey on defenseless, law-abiding citizens. Yet in the latest reporting year, gun homicides claimed 14,542 American lives, compared to 27 in Australia. And all homicides took 19,510 American lives, compared to 222 in Australia. Since the NRA issued its warning, firearm homicides have declined in Australia, while soaring by 3,534 in the U.S. An American is now over 30 times more likely per capita than an Australian to be murdered by a gun, and 7 times more likely to be murdered by any means. If we had rates comparable today to Australia's, some 14,000 American lives would have been saved from firearm homicides in 2017 alone. By the gun lobby's twisted logic, Japan, which has one of the world's strictest gun control laws, should be drenched in innocent blood. Yet out of a population of 127 million, shooters in Japan murdered only 3 persons and injured only 5 in firearm assaults throughout 2017. Australia and Japan are not outliers. As compared to residents of our closest peer democracies in the G7 group of nations plus Australia, an American in 2017 was over 20 times more likely to die from a gun homicide. The gun lobby would have you forget that gun deaths are not limited to murders. In 2017, 23,854 Americans died from gun suicides, 64% more than were killed in firearm homicides. As compared to the peer nations, the 2017 per capita rate of firearm suicides in the United States was 7 times higher, while the rate of suicides by other means was 40% lower. These other democracies all have strict firearm regulations. None has a constitutional right to keep or bear arms, a distinction the United States shares worldwide only with Guatemala, whose gun murder rate is the 3rd highest of some 195 nations worldwide. Why has America lagged behind the democratic world in protecting its citizens from needless death and injury? The culprit is not spending by the NRA on campaigns and lobbying, which other pressure groups exceeded. The real problem is that which gun control advocates fear to name, the Second Amendment. Led by the NRA, the gun lobby exploits a historically defective, perverse reinvention of this amendment to inspire their grassroots supporters, sell guns, and provide constitutional cover for their opposition to making us safer by regulating firearms. The competing movement for gun control has floundered in response to the gun lobby's triumphant marketing of the Second Amendment. Gun control advocates have righteous zeal and noble motives, but lack a winning strategy. Instead of forthrightly refuting the lobby's bogus claims, the gun control movement has instead fallen into the trap of lamely insisting, we support the Second Amendment, but we also support responsible gun control. With such a self-defeating strategy, the movement can never win. It plays on the gun lobby's home turf and fails to rally the American majority that favors stricter firearms regulations. It provokes only scorn from a gun lobby that dismisses yes but assurances as rank hypocrisy, and it ignores the clear history and the true meaning of the Second Amendment itself. The movement for gun control must strike hard with a new strategy. Repeal of the Second Amendment is not only right, but realistic. It would break open the political logjam and open a path for the comprehensive national gun control and safety measures that have eluded the American people for so long. None of these measures would confiscate firearms or stop Americans from using guns for hunting, sport shooting, antique collecting, or legitimate self-defense. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of the free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. These form the Second Amendment. The book Repeal the Second Amendment by Alan J. Lichtman.
Coming up on this week's Science Revolution is Zach Corrigan with Food and Water Watch. Could another zoonotic pandemic be coming? Thomas Lindsay with the Center for Democratic and Environmental Rights is here on the rights of nature and how they may have kept Pennsylvania from industry harm. And Friends of the Earth, Lucas Ross is dropping by on the big oil bailout and how fracking could be next. Plus, Arthur West with the Washington League for Increased Transparency and Ethics is suing Fox So-Called News for endangering Americans by calling the coronavirus a hoax. Can he win? The Science Revolution is available wherever you find your favorite podcasts. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. I realize it's Anything Goes Friday, and I'm going to get to your calls in just a second, but a couple of things I wanted to share with you. First of all, my opening rant about, why is it that these right-wing billionaires are funding groups that are showing up to protest governors who are shutting down their states. That rant is published over at buzzflash.com, and Mark Carlin over there publishes my rants every day. So if you want to check out BuzzFlash every day, it's worth doing. Secondly, I've told you about this pharmacy in Canada that I've used in the past. It's a good place to get drugs inexpensively. And I'm on their email list, and they sent out another note today. They said, one of the largest pharmaceutical wholesalers in the United States recently confirmed, quote, "We are experiencing back orders and declining inventory levels at rates never before experienced." And then they write, "Most of the inventory we are currently acquiring was manufactured prior to the coronavirus crisis or is being manufactured from raw materials stocked by drug makers prior to the crisis beginning." And they go on to note that they think that this is probably true right across the board for virtually all the drugs, because they say the current supply of prescription medication is being acquired by consumers everywhere in the world since the drug manufacturing worldwide came to a halt over the past several weeks. They note the entire worldwide prescription drug supply chain, including drugs sold in the United States, come from China and India, where the coronavirus has had a significant impact on factory production. And India shut down their factories a week or so ago. And that's, where most of your generic drugs are either coming out of China or India. And then secondly, this from the Associated Press, and it's just worth noting. The Kremlin says Russia will gratefully accept President Donald Trump's offer to provide ventilators for Russian coronavirus patients. Trump said Wednesday the U.S. was ready to send ventilators to Russia, saying, quote, "They're having a hard time in Moscow. We're going to help them." Russia has had 232 deaths. We have had 30,000. And the number over 30,000. I think it's over 34,000 now, if I'm remembering my numbers right. In fact, I can take a look at it here. The Johns Hopkins doesn't list American deaths. Let's see. Oh, yeah, this is WHO. You got to dig to find it. Anyhow, let's pick up your phone calls. It's Anything Goes Friday. And Trina in Skokie, Illinois. Hey, Trina, what's on your mind? Trina? Okay, Trina's on line 5. I'm going to put her back on hold, Joyce. Vicky in Seattle. Hey, Vicky, what's up?
Hey, good morning. There's been a question that's been bothering me for weeks now. I just told myself that, eventually we'll be up and running with the testing, and we still don't have testing. What is going on? Can you address that and tell us what you think might be going on behind the testing problem? And I'll take my answer offline. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Vicki. The problem is that it takes months. It takes time. It can take months to develop good tests. When the World Health Organization, China published the genome of this virus in the first couple of weeks of January. Within a week, the WHO had certified that and defined the standards for testing. And within a week of that, this was all in January, a German manufacturer had started making the first test kits that they were shipping. The World Health Organization by the end of January was shipping all over the world to 60 different countries. All that was back in January. And that's why, now in Australia, tests are widespread. They're widely available. In Europe, they're widely available. Germany is testing everybody and their brother. I mean, and they're not just doing virus testing like we're doing here. They're also doing antibody testing to find out who's already had it. And this is why Germany has this insanely low death rate. And it's because basically they're testing people who are not symptomatic, and they're catching a lot of this stuff is coming out of Germany and South Korea. They're discovering that a good chunk of people who are walking around contagious and feeling just fine are contaminated with the virus, are actually carrying the virus, have the active virus in them, and their body just hasn't launched an immune response to it, or it has and it's just not taking them down, and nobody knows exactly why. But in any case, the testing kits take a few months to develop and to start manufacturing in large numbers. We have 325 to 330 million people in the United States. If we're going to test any significant fraction of them, I think we've tested like 2.5 or 3 million people so far, which is pretty substantial. Trump says, we've tested more people than anybody in the world. That's true. But it's a drop in the bucket. And so to give just a very specific and direct answer to your question, why is testing not widely available right now? It's because Donald Trump pissed away a couple of months. That's the bottom line. It wasn't until the middle of March that he started taking this seriously and started reaching out to testing manufacturers in the United States and saying, please get up to scale and let's do this. And, he reached out to Quest Labs and LabCorp and gave them $1.5 million to cover their development costs and all that kind of stuff. And, now everybody who walks into the White House gets tested with a 15-minute test, an instant test. If you're going to be around Trump or Pence, we got to find out. But not so much anywhere else. And it's just because Trump's response has been totally incompetent. And I think that that's one of the reasons why he's trying to stir up these armed revolts against Democratic governors, is because he wants to deflect attention away from the fact that Trump lied, Trump played golf, Trump did rallies, and Americans died. 34,000 Americans have died so far. It'll be 40,000 by next Monday. And one of the things that we know is, had he simply locked down the country 2 weeks before New York State did, 90% of all the deaths in America would not have happened. I mean, that's pretty mind-boggling when you think about it. Karen in Farmington Hills, Michigan. Hey, Karen, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Yeah.
Hey, Karen.
Your phone. Okay. Yeah. Article came out yesterday in Vice, and it's if you Google it, it's all over the net now, about how Governor Schneider, prior Governor Schneider, had prior knowledge of how if they diverted the water from the Flint River, which was a toxic waste dump, to the citizens in Flint, that it would make them, if nothing else, ill, but possibly kill them. And he knew it before it was ever diverted. So this article is heavy in research. Yeah. But the big reason I'm calling is because the statute of limitations to charge Rick Schneider with neglect in office is up in 8 days. And it would be really awesome if people could call the Senate Minority Leader in Michigan, Jim Ananick. His phone
How do you
number
spell
is
that, Karen?
ANANICH.
Okay.
And his phone number is 517-373-0142. And request that apparently he's working on trying to extend the statute of limitations, because
so that Rick Schneider can be prosecuted.
Horrible. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, at least investigate it a little better. I mean, people, even now are very ill, and it's killed many, many more people than it's advertised as.
Well, not to mention the brain damage, the intellectual impairment that it has inflicted on thousands and thousands of Flint children.
Yes, it's horrible because once the lead is in your system, it's in there. And kids who used to be able to walk and run now have to literally crawl. And their growth is stunted because it solidifies your joint. And people are suffering. So it's just obscene.
That's incredible. It's just another Republican grifter. This is what happens when you put Republican grifters into positions of power. So if you live in Michigan, call the Michigan Senate Minority Leader, and yes, amen. Karen, thank you for that. Pam in Atlanta, Georgia. Hey, Pam, what's up? Got a minute to the break.
Yeah, I was watching the show the other day when you were talking about the blue states splitting off and kind of forming their own country. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a really great idea. But what I was wondering is, what's going to happen to the blue cities in the middle of red America? And how are we going to be able to be included in that? Because Atlanta's a very democratic city. Yeah.
I know. I lived there for 13 years. It's although there's still a lot of conservatives there. That's a good question. It's really more of a thought exercise. It's a way of highlighting the fact that, as these right wingers are talking about makers and takers, the real takers are the red states and the real makers are the blue states. And, we just need to emphasize that and point it out. I don't think that there's actually going to be a splitting of America. If anything, what we're going to see is what we're seeing right now in the Midwest, where you've got 8 states that are joining up, including 2 run by Republicans, to figure out how to deal with, reopening their economies and things. Pam, thanks for the call. It's a great question. I don't have an easy answer.
Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls in just a moment. It's Anything Goes Friday. By the way, Greg Palast will be with us at the top of the next hour for a brief hello. And welcome back. Stephen in Kula, Hawaii. Hey, Stephen, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. As much as I'd like to see Elizabeth Warren as the vice presidential nominee, the only problem, as I see it, is the governor of Massachusetts, who would appoint her replacement, is unfortunately a Republican, and we can't afford to lose a reliable Democratic seat in the Senate. We need to take over the Senate. So I think it's unfortunate, but Congress reconvenes right after the first of the year. I forget the date, but I think it's the first week after the new year. The new Congress starts. The president doesn't get sworn in until January 20th. It used to be March 3rd, and they moved it back to January 20th after the Great Depression. And so it might be conceivable, and maybe I'm wrong about this, and if somebody, if my logic is all wrong here, somebody please correct me. You included, Stephen. But if Elizabeth Warren did not give up her seat in the Senate, she would not lose that seat until January 20th. January 20th is after the new governor of Massachusetts would be sworn in. Well, actually, I don't know. I don't know if that governor is up for re-election in this election cycle. Do you know, Stephen? I don't think so, because Deval Patrick was the governor, and I think this new guy, Charlie Baker, was just elected recently, so he would appoint her.
But I don't know if it's a 2-year thing or a 4-year thing. Yeah, that's something to look into. And I've heard that objection before. My guess is that this election for the Senate is not going to be tight. You've got all these, the Cory Gardners of the world, the Martha McSallies. They're starting to poll really, really, really badly. Susan Collins in Maine, they're all underwater. They cast their lot with Trump, and Trump has screwed up so badly and is held in such disrepute that I'm guessing that even if a Republican got appointed to that seat in Massachusetts, first of all, they would only hold it until the next election. And secondly, they would not affect the ability of the Democrats to have a majority. I think it's going to be a rout. But and I think that it's important that there be a good vice president. Now, the Daily Kos is reporting now the two top people, and this is kind of apropos of what I was saying earlier, in the polling for the vice presidential pick are Elizabeth Warren and Stacey Abrams, respectively. And I would be very happy with either one of them. I think that we should be encouraging that. Stephen, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Celia in Santa Monica. Hey, Celia, what's up?
Good morning.
Hey.
My little bit has to do with a lot of the other information you've been imparting to us today from Richard Wolff and so forth. I was always been wondering recently what Jared Kushner and Mike Pence's were doing, it ties in with states and hospitals losing control of their shipments after they've ordered them, and they were being confiscated by FEMA. So,
well, we don't know who's confiscating them. It might be the U.S. military. It might be FEMA. It could be, Jared's brother-in-law. I mean, we just don't know. Did you have a specific thought on it?
The LA Times has done some investigation on it. It just came out today that they are confiscating these shipments and giving them to private medical equipment distributors like McKesson, and
who are reselling them? I got it. Did you know that Ronald Reagan committed treason to become president in 1980 and George Herbert Walker Bush was in on it and he avoided being prosecuted for this in 1992 with a little help from Bill Barr? It's on page 116 of my book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Celia just called just a moment ago and said that the LA Times is reporting that the federal government is seizing, we know now that this is going on. The federal government is seizing shipments of respirators, N95 masks, gowns, shields, and ventilators that are on cargo planes bound for blue states, that they're seizing these things, but we didn't know where they were going. And the LA Times is reporting that they're taking these seized shipments and giving them or selling them to for-profit wholesalers, middlemen companies essentially, who are then reselling them into red states. This is just bizarre. I've got to track down the story, which I'll try to do at the top of the hour, and we'll get back to you on that in more detail. This is grim stuff. Trina in Skokie, Illinois. Hey, Trina, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Love you. Love your show. I am calling to talk about the issue of racism in this pandemic. And this is a professional opinion because I have extensive education and training in the science of racism from multiple institutions. You said follow the money earlier in the show, and I very much agree with that. That's a very good phrase to follow and use. But in this country, I think it's also important to follow the racism. The image of the pandemic victim, up until about a week ago, the general population was thinking most of the victims are innocent victims, and they just look like Ivanka and her kids. And then all of a sudden, a week ago, we learned that the death rate, those that were dying from this virus, happened to be overwhelmingly people of color. 70% of the dead in Chicago were African American, etc.
Right.
And once we learned those shocking numbers, on that same timeline, at the same time, actually the next day, was the big announcement that we need to start opening up this country. We need to stop all of this investment and all of this taking this seriously. It was kind of like the AIDS epidemic and them not taking it seriously because of who the victims were.
Right. Yeah, Reagan wouldn't even mention the word AIDS for the first 4 years of his presidency, as it was killing. It killed two very, very close friends of mine, and Fred Derby and Michael Edmonds. Very, very close friends.
Absolutely.
Who
and now the victims are being. And now the image of the
Trina,
victims
I would argue that you
people of
can't
color.
disentangle racism from the money. Racism is very profitable. Slavery was an economic institution first and foremost, and then it became a political and cultural institution. And racism to this day is about maintaining profits, about keeping a low-income underclass so that the overclass, as it were, could take the lion's share of the goodies and benefits in society. I mean, racism and economics or follow the money, I think, are to a large extent the same thing. But I agree with your point.
If you look at that book, which I know you've read, What's the Matter with Kansas?
Yeah.
One of the points is that why are these poor white people, who are by far the largest users of food stamps and other government programs, voting against those same programs? Because in their
right,
head,
because they think that they're disproportionately going to black people, which is not true. But that's the story that has been told since Reagan. Reagan's whole welfare queen thing was, she was black and she had a Cadillac, and all these other god awful stereotypes about urban black people. Trina, your point is well taken. Thank you very much, Mark in San Francisco. Hey, Mark, what's up?
Tom, the millionaires and billionaires are freaked out of another FDR era coming in.
That's my opinion. And they're trying to stop it. They're trying to do everything they can to stop it. They're trying to provide blocking and tackling for Trump and his cronies and his buddies. And that's going to mean higher taxes on them. I mean, FDR took the top tax rate from 25% up to 90%, and it's going to happen again. If you get a Democrat in there and the right-wing billionaires are going, oh my God, we can't have that. Thank you. Russ in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Russ, what's up?
Yeah, you probably didn't see this. I didn't see it either. I don't watch the Trump dog and pony show. I can't stand it, and makes me want to do bad things to the TV. But I depend on my friend Lawrence O'Donnell on The Last Word on MSNBC to keep me up to... and what happened yesterday was extraordinary. I want to share it with you. A reporter, this was not too far into it, when a reporter from Westwood, I don't know the name, doesn't matter, a reporter from Westwood asked Trump, how many tests do you think it will take to get to the point where we can reopen the economy safely? Trump said, and I quote, I'm not saying anything, turned it over to his favorite propaganda pony, Deborah Birx, and she gave a rambling 3-minute or so non-answer, refused to answer the question, whereupon Trump came back to the podium and said, thank you all very much for coming, bye. He closed it down. He ran, okay? And, I told you last Friday, when I talked to you last Friday, that on the previous day, that was a week ago Thursday, Trump said, quote, you will get your testing when I get my economy back. He said those words. And that's why you don't have any testing in this country, because Trump, if we had true numbers, if we had testing with true numbers, we would have millions and millions of people affected in this country. Trump doesn't want that to be known.
Yeah, it's probably at least 8 or 10 million, maybe 20 million Americans who have this virus right now. And we're going to see that in a couple of weeks. Russ, thank you. Thank you very much for that information, horrible as it is. We'll be back. Greg Palast is going to drop by, and then we'll continue with Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann program. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
So we've got a new video up for regular supporters of our program over at thomhartmann.com, and this is about just a totally bizarre story about these three guys with no VA experience, not even veterans, who are all big shots down at Mar-a-Lago, that Donald Trump has put in charge of the Veterans Administration functionally. And their association, one of them is the head of Marvel Entertainment, their association with Johnson & Johnson and the New York Stock Exchange, and Johnson & Johnson, the big drug company, taking this very, very cheap chemical, ketamine, tweaking the molecule a little bit and rolling it out as a new anti-suicide drug, Spravato, that in clinical trials caused 6 people to die, 3 of them by suicide, and none of the people taking the placebo to die. And now Trump is telling the VA, you have to buy this highly inflated price drug from Johnson & Johnson, and the Democrats want to know what's up with the VA crowd guys. Check it out. It's at thomhartmann.com.
Thank you.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is ADHD, A Hunter in a Farmer's World by Thom Hartmann. This is from Chapter 3, Hunters in Our Schools and Offices, The Origin of ADHD. The earliest theories about attention deficit disorder characterized it as a diseased state that had to do with brain damage or dysfunction. At various times, it has been lumped in with fetal alcohol syndrome, mental retardation, various genetic mental illnesses, psychiatric disorders resulting from early trauma or childhood abuse, and the theory that parental smoking led to fetal oxygen deprivation. Prior to the 1970s, when ADHD was first characterized as a specific disorder, ADHD children and adults were largely treated simply as bad people, even though attentional deficits have been recognized in the psychological literature since 1905. They were the kids who always got into trouble, the James Deans of the world, the rootless and unsettled adults like Abraham Lincoln's father, the Lone Ranger, or John Dillinger. More recent research, however, has demonstrated a high incidence of ADHD among the parents of ADHD kids. This discovery caused some psychologists to initially postulate that ADHD was the result of growing up in a dysfunctional family. They suggested that ADHD may follow the same pattern as child or spousal abuse, moving through generations as learned behavior. The dietary-causing advocates contended that children's pattern their parents' eating habits, and this accounts for the generational patterns of ADHD. Other studies suggest that, like Down syndrome or muscular dystrophy, ADHD is a genetic disease, and a specific gene, the A1 variant of the D2 dopamine receptor gene, has been identified by scientists as the leading candidate. But if ADHD is a genetic disease or an abnormality, it's a popular one, possibly afflicting as many as 25 million individuals in the United States. Some estimates put ADHD as occurring in 20% of males and 5% of females. Other estimates are much lower, hitting a bottom of 3% of males and 0.5% of females. With such a wide distribution among our population, is it reasonable to assume that ADHD is simply a quirk, that it's some sort of aberration caused by defective genes or child abuse? When the condition is so widely distributed, inevitable questions arise. Why? Where did ADHD come from? The answer is, people with ADHD are the leftover hunters, those whose ancestors evolved and matured thousands of years in the past in hunting societies. There is ample precedent for genetic diseases, in quotes, that in fact represent evolutionary survival strategies. Sickle cell anemia, for example, is now known to make its victims less susceptible to malaria. When living in the jungles of Africa, where malaria is endemic, it was a powerful environmental tool against death by disease. In the malaria-free environment of North America, it became a liability. The same is true of Tay-Sachs disease, a genetic condition that hits mainly Eastern European Jews and confers on them a relative immunity to tuberculosis. And even cystic fibrosis, the deadly genetic disease common among Caucasians, 1 in 25 white Americans carries the gene, may represent a genetic adaptation. Recent research indicates the cystic fibrosis gene helps protect its victims at younger ages from death by such diarrheal diseases as cholera, which periodically swept Europe thousands of years ago. It's not so unusual, apparently, for humans to have built into our genetic material protection against local diseases and other environmental conditions. Certainly, Darwin's theory of natural selection argues in favor of such bodily defenses. Those individuals with immunities would survive to procreate and pass along their genetic material. As the human race moved from its earliest ancestors, 2 basic types of cultures evolved: In the areas that were lush with plant and animal life and had low human population density, hunters and gatherers predominated. In other parts of the world, particularly Asia, farming or agricultural societies evolved. Be it pursuing buffalo in North America, hunting deer in Europe, chasing wildebeest in Africa, or picking fish from a stream in Asia, these hunters needed a certain set of physical and mental characteristics to be successful. Number one, they constantly monitor their environment. That rustle in the bushes could be a lion or a coiled snake. Failure to be fully aware of the environment and notice that faint sound might mean a swift and painful death. Or that sound or flash of movement might be the animal the hunter was stalking, and noticing it would mean the difference between a full belly and hunger. I've walked through forests and jungles with modern hunter types in the United States, Europe, Australia, and East Africa, and one characteristic always struck me. They notice everything. A flipped over stone, a tiny footprint, a distant sound, an odd smell in the air, the direction in which flowers point or moss grows. All these things have meaning to hunters, and even when walking quickly, they notice everything. Number two, they can totally throw themselves into the hunt. Time is elastic for them. Another characteristic of a good hunter is the ability to totally focus on the moment, utterly abandoning all consideration of any other time or place. When the hunter sees the prey, he gives chase through gully or ravine, over fields or through trees, giving no thought to the events of the day before, nor not considering the future, simply living totally in that one pure moment and immersing himself in it. When involved in the hunt, time seems to speed. When not in the hunt, time becomes slow. While a hunter's ability to concentrate in general may be low, his ability to utterly throw himself into the hunt at the moment is astonishing. Three, they're flexible, capable of changing strategy on a moment's notice. If the wild boar vanishes into the brush and a rabbit appears, the hunter is off in a new direction. The book ADHD, A Hunter in a Farmer's World by Thom Hartmann. Chapter 1, Killing a Nation. The book Fred Kaplan's The Bomb.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back to the third hour of our program. On the line with us is our old buddy Greg Palast, the investigative journalist, author, filmmaker. His most recent, The Best Democracy Money Can Buy. And he's got a new book out. We're doing an event tomorrow, in fact, kind of a rollout and promo preview of the book. His book is How Trump Stole the 2020 Election, if I'm recalling correctly. GregPalast.com is the website. Greg_Palast is the Twitter handle. Hey, Greg, do I have that right?
Hey. Yeah, How Trump Stole 2020. No, I don't have a crystal ball. It's like your final warning. And you and I will be hosting a Facebook Live from 1 p.m. Pacific, that's 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific. Just go to the Thom Hartmann Facebook page, or Greg Palast Investigates, 1 to 4 p.m. Pacific. And join us with a lot of people like Lee Camp and Barbara Arnwine and some terrific people that will be joining us.
Cool. So how did Trump steal 2020?
Oh, boy. Well, the number one thing is that we have 17 million people who've been purged from the voter rolls in the past 2 years. This is their new game. It's, they simply just won't allow you to vote. And we're talking about 2-1 Democrats. They rolled out, basically they did the test run of this steal when Brian Kemp of Georgia stole the election from Stacey Abrams in Georgia in 2018. He did that by removing 500,000 people illegally from the voter rolls. He said, oh, that's kind of nice. We're going to do that in Ohio. We're going to do that in Michigan, Wisconsin. And, in fact, the battle in Wisconsin, the reason why people were forced to stand in line and basically do this dance of death was the GOP hopes of making sure they had a total lockup of the Wisconsin State Supreme Court, which has been ordering the purge of 250,000 voters. This is 2-1 Democrats, overwhelmingly voters of color. Trump won Wisconsin by just supposedly 22,000 votes, Tom. If they knock off 250,000 progressives, they've got Wisconsin. They're doing the same game in Michigan, Ohio, all these swing states, North Carolina, and, of course, Georgia, but should actually be a Democratic state. So that's the core of it. But also now I'm really very, very concerned about obviously we're going to have to vote by mail. You're in Oregon, where they actually encourage, force people to vote by mail, but they actually help people vote by mail. That ain't so in some of these swing states where they use vote by mail as kind of Jim Crow goes postal. And so I'm very, very concerned about that. According to MIT study, 22% of all mail-in ballots never get counted. That's over a fifth, and it's overwhelmingly low-income voters. And the biggest problem, by the way, Tom, is that people don't get the ballots. If you're low-income people move apartments, students move dorm room to dorm room, young people move around. You don't have to re-register if you move in your neighborhood, but you won't get your ballot. You don't get it, can't vote it. By the way, Senator Wyden of Oregon has a terrific bill, but good luck getting it past Mitch McConnell, which says that everyone not only gets a ballot, but you can download the ballot from the internet. There's no reason why people can't download ballots. You can only vote once as long as you have as long as you're the voter.
Sure, it's like IRS forms.
Yeah. So the thing is, in fact, the Republican Party in Wisconsin, because they lost that vote, they forced people. Horrendous. People are literally going to die from that vote. People lined up in Milwaukee. And the Republican chairman now said, "Gee, he regrets that he didn't go to mail-in voting." Yeah, we have to fix this system. But so my book is called "How Trump Stole 2020," but it's not a projection. It's really a warning. We can switch this around. It's not about Trump. It's about democracy. Let's get everyone voting.
Yeah. Yeah, Greg. There's a couple of places in the Constitution, particularly in the 19th Amendment and in the 15th Amendment, I believe, where it explicitly references the right to vote. Why? I've never been able to figure this out. The Supreme Court. I get it in Bush v. Gore. They said that, Rehnquist wrote the opinion, and he said there is no constitutional right to vote for President of the United States in the Constitution, or to that effect. And of course, what he was talking about is the Electoral College. We don't actually elect the president; the Electoral College does. We elect electors. But that said, this right to vote that is repeatedly mentioned in the Constitution, that's explicitly mentioned in the 1993 Motor Voter Law, the National Voter Registration Act, I believe it's called, says there is, all Americans have a right to vote. Why is it that has never? Say that again.
The National Voter Registration Act of '93 says voting is a fundamental right. It's in federal law. Good luck enforcing it with the Kavanaugh Supreme Court. Good luck if you're in Georgia with when you had Secretary of State Brian Kemp turn himself into Governor Brian Kemp. In Ohio, in Michigan, in Wisconsin, where you have elements who know it's real simple, Tom. It's ugly, but the truth is there aren't enough white guys to elect Donald Trump and a Republican Senate and Congress. There just aren't. You have to look at the new demographics of America. They cannot win by letting everyone vote. And
white men are something like what, 17% of the electorate?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's gone way down enough that they are unless you steal votes, you prevent people from voting. As I said, 17 million people removed from the voter rolls. You have 22% of mail-in ballots not counted. But understand things like ID laws. Okay, who doesn't have a driver's license? Well, guess what? People who don't have cars. Who are they? Is that the rich who don't have cars? Basically, the country club set will always get their votes counted. We're talking about low-income voters, students who move about. And by the way, the new target, as I talk about in my book, I have a chapter called Voting Gangnam Style, where there's a brand new attack on the Asian American voters, because while they used to vote in the majority Republican, they now vote as if they've turned black. 75% of Asian Americans vote Democratic. as beginning in 2012. That scares them. They have to prevent people from voting. It's crazy.
Well, if they're doing similar name matches, the Hispanic and the Asian communities are the easiest to take out. Those are the smallest name.
Oh, yeah. So that's right. So we have Chris Kobach and his cross-check system. And by the way, our work, we have in How Trump Stole 2020, we'll talk about tomorrow on the Facebook Live at 1 p.m. Just go to Thom Hartmann's Facebook page, by the way, at 1 p.m. Pacific. The cross-check system was created by Chris Kobach of Kansas, or KKK, if you can't remember the name. And it was about saying people named Jose Garcia, named David Kim, are registered to vote in 2 states, and therefore they're illegal voters. Remove them. 1.1 million voters were removed, named Garcia and Kim and Rodriguez and Johnson, an African American name. These names were removed because they said that they're registered in 2 states illegally. They didn't know about it. They came in, they lost their votes, or they were forced to provisional ballots. Tom, we have 3 million provisional ballots cast in 2016 election. 1 million were rejected. That was Hillary Clinton's victory margin.
Yeah, amazing. Greg Palast, tune in tomorrow over on Facebook Live. Go to Greg Palast's Facebook page or ours. We'll have a link to it. The event is going on 1 p.m. Pacific time. That's, I believe, 4 p.m. Eastern time. Greg, thanks a lot for dropping by. Great talking to you.
You're the best. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's 15 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. It's Anything Goes Friday. And welcome back, John in Portland, Oregon. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I'll try and be quick here. As horrendous as the pandemic is, I think many people are numb to the massive figures that we see, the 600,000 cases in this country and the 33,000 deaths. And every time I see that shown on TV, I think that the one thing that they should be saying is to compare that to the population of the United States, that we are 5% of the world's population, but we have 32% of the corona cases, and I think up to 22% of the deaths now. And I think it's increasing that ratio is increasing at 1% or 2 a day.
And this is all because Trump did nothing for months.
Yes? Tom?
Go ahead, John. Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, I would like to see a reporter go into these press conferences that Trump holds and say, Mr. President, how do you reconcile the fact that we are 5% of the world's population but have 33% of the cases and 22% of the deaths? How can that not represent a failure of your policies in combating the pandemic?
The reporters are
real quick. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Wanted to make is maybe sometime when Mark Pocan is on, or one or the other representatives, if you could suggest to them or talk to them about, there should be an organized response to these pandemic conferences, a 30-minute rebuttal of where real experts present what the real situation is, identify the lies presented in those press conferences, and tell us what actually should be done. If it was hosted, if it was led by Joe Biden, that would be great, okay? But it needs to be a nonpartisan presentation, and it needs to be something that the Democrats demand that every news station or cable station carries, including Fox News and America One. And what they can do to get Fox News to carry such a thing is, if they refuse to do it, to contact everyone who advertises on it and say that if you do not force them to carry these rebuttals, which are in the interest of the American people, that we will identify you as part of it. And what you should do is withdraw your advertising from Fox News if they will not.
John, none of that's going to happen. It's just, it's not going to happen. First of all, you can't, people have tried to organize advertising boycotts against Fox News, and you could argue that the one against, well, actually, there have probably been a couple. O'Reilly was, it comes to mind, might have been, useful, but, or successful, rather. But, you're dreaming. These are for-profit businesses, these media, and Trump is making them money. We'll be right back.
Podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. So we've got a new video up for regular supporters of our program over at thomhartmann.com, and this is about just a totally bizarre story about these three guys with no VA experience, not even veterans, who are all big shots down at Mar-a-Lago, that Donald Trump has put in charge of the Veterans Administration functionally. And their association, one of them is the head of Marvel Entertainment, their association with Johnson & Johnson and the New York Stock Exchange, and Johnson & Johnson, the big drug company, taking this very, very cheap chemical ketamine, tweaking the molecule a little bit, and rolling it out as a new anti-suicide drug, Spravato, that in clinical trials caused 6 people to die, 3 of them by suicide, and none of the people taking the placebo to die. And now Trump is telling the VA, you have to buy this highly inflated price drug from Johnson & Johnson, and the Democrats want to know what's up with the VA crowd guys. Check it out. It's at thomhartmann.com.
Welcome back. Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann program. I did want to share a couple things with you that I thought were interesting in the news. A fascinating story in the New York Times today by Jeremy Peters titled, Why Michael Savage is Blasting Hannity and the Right-Wing Media on the Virus. I have actually, over the years on this program, praised Michael Savage a number of times, not because I agree with his ideology and I think he's said many things that are just truly reprehensible, including his Muslim bashing, which continues to this day. But he is brilliant at what he does. He's a brilliant storyteller. He's a brilliant talk radio host. And, as much as I disagree with what he says and the positions he holds, you have to acknowledge that skill, just like you have to acknowledge that, Trump is a brilliant showman. And thus he's getting, he's going to end up with $2 or $3 billion worth of free television time by the time the elections roll around with his nightly TV rallies. Same thing, we would just be pretending reality wasn't reality if we didn't acknowledge those things. But Michael Savage is now the lone voice on the right who's calling out these guys. He says, this is from the article, quote, the pimps in the right-wing media who tell you what you want to hear. He's calling them out. He says they're intellectual dwarfs. They're science illiterates. Michael Savage, of course, actually has a PhD from the University of California and training in epidemiology. He said, we're living in a terrible time in America where the truth has died. How can we not let our side be called on the carpet when they lie to the people, says Michael Savage. Do you understand the danger you're in by listening to these people and just following them blindly over the cliff? And, he makes jokes about Dr. Hannity and all that kind of stuff. Fascinating. There are some people who are paying attention. Now, that's the good news. I guess the bad news is that Michael Savage's audience is nowhere near as large as Limbaugh's or Hannity's, they're who are subsidized. If you go back to a Politico article, Ken Vogel did it several years ago, back in 2013, I think, maybe a little later than that. But in any case, about how Limbaugh and Hannity are getting millions of dollars a year in subsidies from these right-wing groups like the Heritage Foundation. Meanwhile, a fellow by the name of Jeff Wittenbrink was admitted to the Baton Rouge Medical Center with the coronavirus. It worsened over the weekend. In addition to pneumonia, he's battling a high fever and a persistent cough. Now, who is Jeff Wittenbrink? Turns out he is Tony Spell's lawyer. Tony Spell is the Louisiana preacher who held big gatherings over the last couple of weeks. And in fact, last week he said, quote, "Death is a welcomed friend." This is from a raw story by Matthew Chapman. Last week, Spell urged followers to defy public health lockdowns and attend church services, even if their lives are in danger, saying, quote, "Death is a welcomed friend." This week, he started a social media campaign urging people to take their $1,200 checks and send them essentially to him, to send them to churches, rather than pay for food or bills or pay down your credit cards. Well, Tony Spell's lawyer was there. He was on April 2nd and on April 5th, on Palm Sunday, he was there at the event that this so-called Christian pastor held, and now he's in the hospital in bad shape, which I would never wish on anybody, but it just, people wonder, are people actually putting their lives at risk by showing up for Tony Spell's things? Yeah. Meanwhile, I get mail from Donald Trump. "Dear Fred, recent polls are showing tremendous disapproval across the board for coverage by the lamestream media. Only a fraction of Americans believe what they're saying. It's pathetic. Because their ratings are so low, they can't stand that millions of Americans are tuning in each day to hear a real update from their president about what's going on in our nation right now. The fake news media can't stand that he's telling the truth. In an effort to silence Trump, some lunatics have even suggested that he stop his daily press conferences. This is just more proof that the left-wing media has become unhinged, and they are truly the enemy of the people. President Trump wants you to know that he never stopped working to keep America safe. No matter what they throw at him, he'll continue to stand before you each and every day and tell you nothing but the truth. We know we can't trust the left-wing media, so we just launched our official press conference approval poll, and we're counting on patriots like you to take it and help us break through the fake news filter once and for all." And of course, you click on the poll, and it asks a couple of questions, and it asks you for money. And then the other one I got, that was from 2 days ago. This is from yesterday. "Fred, once again, Democrats are prioritizing their corrupt political dreams over the well-being of American citizens. With nervous Nancy and crying Chuck as their ringleaders, they're choosing to block a $251 billion funding boost for small businesses around the country, which would help them keep their employees on payroll. We can't let them get away with their un-American actions anymore. We need to send a message that's so loud that even the fake news media won't be able to sweep it under the rug." You get how this propaganda, every day in my email box, or nearly every day, at least 4 or 5 times a week, I get one of these things from the Trump campaign begging for money. And I'm guessing that there's a bunch of old folks around America who probably sent him all of their life savings. It's incredible. Meanwhile, in Texas, Attorney General Ken Paxton has just issued a letter saying that if you ask for an absentee ballot in Texas, you could go to prison. Seriously. I'll tell you about that after the break.
The Thom Hartmann program. Call 202-808-9925.
And then we'll pick up your calls because it's Anything Goes Friday. We'll be right back.
Book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Proof of Conspiracy, How Trump's International Collusion is Threatening American Democracy by Seth Abramson. This is from the introduction. In late 2015, after Donald Trump has formally announced his candidacy for president, a geopolitical conspiracy emerges overseas, whose key participants are the leaders of Russia, Israel, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Egypt. These 6 men decide that Trump is the antidote to their ills. For Russia, U.S. sanctions. For Israel, the lack of Arab allies. For Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Egypt, perceived threats emanating from Iran. The conspirators commit themselves to doing whatever is necessary to ensure that Donald Trump is elected. Trump's presidential campaign is aware of and benefits from this conspiracy both before and after the 2016 election. On March 19, 2018, British journalist David Hurst, the former chief foreign leader writer for The Guardian, publishes the most important report of his career. Hurst, at one time the Moscow bureau chief at The Guardian, is now editor-in-chief of his own publishing venture, a London-based Middle East watchdog called the Middle East Eye. In the spring of 2018, he reports the existence of a years-long, continent-spanning conspiracy that will eventually envelop the President of the United States, the Red Sea Conspiracy. This book denominates the conspiracy Hurst uncovers as the Red Sea Conspiracy for the simple reason that it is hatched on a yacht in the middle of the Red Sea, a seawater inlet of the Indian Ocean bordered by, among other countries, Saudi Arabia and Egypt. One imagines that in his many years as a correspondent and commentator for The Scotsman, The Huffington Post, Al Jazeera, El Arabi, El Jaid, TRT World, which is Turkish, Masr al-Aghan, Egypt, and The Guardian, Hurst never thought he'd stumble on a story as far-reaching in its implications as the Red Sea Conspiracy. But he did, and what he found could change the course of history. This book chronicles the events around the globe that preceded and followed the fall 2015 origin of the conspiracy, with a special focus on how the conspiracy prompted Donald Trump and his aides, allies, and associates to covertly collude with 6 countries, both before and after the 2016 presidential election: Russia, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Israel, Bahrain, and Egypt. Events that began on the Red Sea in 2015 now influence President Trump's foreign policy toward all of these countries, toward other countries not involved in the conspiracy, such as Qatar and Iran, and more broadly toward Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. The story of the Red Sea Conspiracy begins with a man named George Nader. As reported by Hurst in the Middle East Eye, toward the end of 2015, Nader, then an advisor to the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, known as MBZ, convened, with his patron's permission, a summit of some of the Middle East's most powerful leaders. Gathered on a boat in the Red Sea in the fall of 2015 were Mohammed bin Salman, known as MBS, Deputy Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, who would shortly become the heir apparent to the throne of the Saudi Kingdom; MZB himself, by 2015 the de facto ruler of the United Arab Emirates; Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, the president of Egypt; Prince Salman bin Hamad, the Crown Prince of Bahrain; and King Abdullah II of Jordan. Nader, the improbable maestro of these rulers' clandestine get-together, intended the plan he posed to the men to include the nation of Libya, but no representative from that nation attended the gathering. Of the leaders aboard the yacht, 2, MBS and MBZ, are already close. According to a New Yorker interview with Richard A. Clarke, a counterterrorism advisor to Presidents Barack Obama and George W. Bush, MBS and MBZ, quote, talk on the phone all day to each other, end quote. The Red Sea meeting, although technically convened by Nader, is a means for MBZ to advance ambitions that he and MBS have designed together. The 2 Sunni Arab leaders' intention, Hurst records, is to remake the Middle East with the covert assistance of a highly placed American politician. They intend to do this by first renaming and reconstituting the membership of the 6-member Gulf Cooperation Council, the GCC, which in 2015 comprises Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, and Qatar, while reorienting, too, its regional ambitions and global alliances. The proposed GCC realignment would evict Kuwait, Oman, and Qatar from the Council and replace these 3 countries with Egypt, Jordan, and Libya, thereby eliminating the entity's historical association with the Persian Gulf and remaking it as, instead, an alliance constituting, quote, an elite regional group of 6 countries which would supplant the GCC and form the nucleus of a coalition of pro-U.S. and pro-Israeli states in the Middle East, end quote. According to two sources briefed on the 2015 Red Sea Summit, quote, Nader said this group of states could become a force in the region that the United States government could depend on to counter the influence of Turkey and Iran, end quote. Prior to 2015, Turkey and Saudi Arabia had intermittently enjoyed strong diplomatic ties. The book Proof of Conspiracy by Seth Abramson. So every 5 years, the U.S. Department of Agriculture comes out with new guidelines, and we just put up a video over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program that talks about how the Trump administration, in this insanely corrupt deal with the $100 billion industry of ultra-processed, high-sugar, high-salt, high-fat foods that is literally killing 700,000 Americans a year, has said, oh, we're going to change the guidelines so that these fast food, high-processed food companies can shovel their stuff into our school lunch programs, into our kids. We're going to change the guidelines so people aren't informed about the importance of, dialing back somewhat on meat and on salt and sugar and all these other things. It's nuts. You can check the whole thing out over at thomhartmann.com. Look for the video for our, the supporters of our program at thomhartmann.com. African English individual who starved to death recently in the United Kingdom. The neoliberal Thatcher policies are apparently echoing through the British system now in a rather substantial way, the same way that Reaganomics is echoing through the American system, and we've got tens of thousands of Americans who die every year because they lack health care or they can't afford copays and things. And we have literally millions of children in America who are malnourished or even go to bed hungry every night. It's pretty breathtaking stuff, and I think you'll find the rant particularly interesting or useful, and hope you can share it with your friends when you pick it up. It's over at thomhartmann.com. Thanks again for supporting our program. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And I mentioned this just before the break, and I just fill you in. In Texas, the law says that if you want to get an absentee ballot, you must either be over 65 or disabled or out of the country, out of the county, absent from the county during the election. Like overseas or in some other part of the state or whatever. Those are the only provisions. So Ken Paxton, who is the Attorney General for Texas, dancing to the tune of Greg Abbott, the governor's, the song he's singing, all the Republicans are. We don't want people to vote, right? Well, elections have never been won by the majority of the people. They are not and they will not be in the future. Quite candidly, our leverage in the election goes up as the voting populace goes down, said Paul Weyrich famously in 1980 when he was doing voter suppression campaigns for Ronald Reagan. Or vote theft campaigns. Greg Pallas says, somebody steals my car. I don't say my car's been suppressed. Why would you say that their vote has been suppressed if they steal your damn vote? Well, he has issued a letter saying that fear of contracting COVID-19 is not a valid excuse. And if you get a ballot and you vote a ballot based on, quote, false information, that would be that you're saying that I'm afraid of COVID-19, that you would face, quote, criminal sanctions. In other words, you could go to jail in Texas for getting an absentee ballot. Now, this is being appealed, and it's going to be interesting to see what comes out of the courts, but this is how bizarre and dysfunctional the Republican Party is, and that the only way that they can hold power is to prevent people from voting. It's just amazing. Dave in Federal Way, Washington. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Hey, not too much, Tom. First, I just wanted to say I'm really glad you keep keep covering the way the Trump administration ignored the intelligence community. I know it's hard to talk about, but it's so important that we capture that he ignored this because,
Well, and we knew before that he was ignoring the intelligence community in December. Now we have proof out of Israel that he was ignoring the intelligence community in friggin' November.
Yes, Tom. Look, it's not James Bond stuff, all right? The largest contributor to this nation's intelligence picture is weather, the weatherman, meteorology. It's the largest contributor to intelligence work, okay? But anyways, that's not what I called about. What I wanted to call about is to get your riff or opinion, or whatever you want to call it, on how, because you mentioned the coronavirus likes animal proteins, right? It seems to. And,
well, it enters cells through the angiotensin receptor, which is the hormone that regulates blood pressure in humans and presumably all other mammals. I can't say that with certainty, but I'd be astonished if it wasn't. Go ahead, Dave. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Lisa Miller, she did a study for UC Davis. She's the head scientist at the National Primate Research Center, where they studied the impact of this particulate matter that is released from forest fires and brush fires on primates. All right, and at 2.5 micron, that particulate matter has a definitive adverse impact on young primates, which humans are a part, as far as their immune response. But it's not so certain for adult primates, the immune response. Okay, so my question is, how, and this COVID is a CPR, cardiopulmonary respiratory. It prefers that part of our anatomy. What do you think is going to happen during the forest fire season? Do you think this is going to reemerge? You think it's going to be what do they call that? It's going to reoccur, this COVID disease?
Because people have their immunity diminished because of the smoke in the air. I don't know, Dave. I mean, there is some speculation that what's killing people isn't so much the virus replicating, but the body's response to it, these so-called cytokine storms. And that's what's filling up the lungs is basically the byproducts of your own immune system. So if your immune system is suppressed, they're doing a clinical trial right now. I mean the ones on remdesivir, or however you say this, Gilead drug, those look very promising. But they're also trying some of the immunosuppressive drugs to see, in people who they pretty much know are going to die anyway, to see if they can calm down that cytokine storm. They can calm down the body's immune response. So it may be that, people who have hyperactive immune systems, which is most Americans, because we just, we don't have parasites anymore, and that's why we have all these autoimmune diseases that people take immune suppressants for, the psoriasis and arthritis and all these other things. It may be that people would actually be in a better position if their immune system. I just don't have any idea, and we don't know. But keep thinking, Dave. I love the way you think, and your curiosity is always fascinating. Lori in Portland. Hey, Lori, what's on your mind today?
Well, I wanted to tell you about a study that they're starting in Corvallis, Oregon. It's in the Gazette-Times paper yesterday, and they're going to do random testing to about 1% of the population, and they're going to go door to door through all different neighborhoods in the city, and anybody can volunteer to take the test with or without symptoms. And they're having help through Oregon State University and the veterinary program to run these tests, and people will get the results back in 7 to 10 days, and they're giving them to the Oregon Health Authority to see how many people in the community throughout all the different neighborhoods may have had it or do have it and are carriers without even realizing that they're spreading it.
Right. This is the antibody testing that they've been doing in Germany for months. Yeah.
Yeah, and they're doing it throughout the whole community, and they would like other veterinary clinics to get involved because they have the capability for the testing. So I just thought it was really interesting, and would like to. They're starting here, I believe, this coming weekend, and they'll do it 4 weekends in a row. They go to your door, they ask you a few questions, they'll leave you a test kit, you take the sample and leave it out, and they come back the next day and pick it up. So it'll be interesting to follow the study and see what. I know, right? It's in Corvallis, Oregon, in a little city, so
they're doing it in Corvallis. That's fascinating. Well, Lori, keep us up to date on that, would you? When the results come back, check it out.
Yes, I will.
Okay, thank you very much. Zach in North Hollywood, California. Hey, Zach, what's up?
Good morning, Tom. the Pentagon, what's the two-word mission statement and mantra they've always cited was the reason for their existence, and the single thing they hang on the front door to constantly remind us to be afraid, and why they bilk the public out of billions of dollars every year in its name? Say it with me. National security.
National security, yeah.
So I was thinking about this as a satire, and then it started to make a lot of sense. Transform the Pentagon into the National Security Hospital. And it could be the headquarters for single-payer health care and for universal health care all around the world. Just keep the same revenue coming in, change the logo on the checks.
Yeah, we spend a fraction of $1 trillion, $800 billion more or less, every year on the military. Up from like $500 or $600 billion when Clinton was in office, and it's massive. And the Pentagon is not protecting us from this virus. The national security is not intact. We have the highest rate of infection in the world. We have the highest number of deaths in the world. We are number one. Donald Trump has led us, into this Armageddon, this Holocaust of people in the United States. And we should be taking part of the federal part of that budget for the Pentagon and saying, we're going to use this for health care. That's more important. That is national security.
Tom, let them go to their shareholders and beg for bullets.
Yeah, there you go.
Thanks, Tom.
Good one. Thanks, Zach. Good to hear from you. Actually, George, let me put you back on hold here because I think I have 15 seconds until we're going to hit a break here, and that would not be fair to you. I was at 5 seconds. I was just going to give George in Garden City, Kansas, an opportunity to talk. We'll pick up George on the other side of the break. It's 45 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann program. Fair and only slightly unbalanced. The place where we lay out the truths that the multinational corporations, the right-wing billionaires, and the Republican politicians would really rather you didn't know all about. Stick around. We'll be back with more of the truth here on the Thom Hartmann program. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls on Anything Goes Friday right after this. And welcome back. George in Garden City, Kansas, watching us on Free Speech TV. Hey, George, what's up?
I just got a question, Tom. I know Stephanie Grisham was the old press secretary. Now she's doing something else. Never had one press conference. I don't know how much she made on that for doing nothing like most Republicans. But I don't even know who the new press secretary is, and they haven't had a press conference, so I wonder how much they're making.
The new one's name is, as I recall, Kyla McEnany or something like that. It's close to that. And she is a right-wing commentator on Fox News who is right now aggressively attacking Democrats using the social media arm of the White House. And Grisham has gone back to the job she held before she became the White House spokesperson, which was, or head of the press office, or whatever you call it, which is being the chief of staff to Melania. Help her pick out which I don't really care jacket she's going to wear today, or that kind of thing. So there's some good coverage of this. There's some good coverage of her over at dailykos.com, DAILYKOS.com. I recommend you check it out. But she's she's
in Kansas. We got a blue governor now in a red state. I don't know how that's going to work in November, but I hope it keeps going that way. So thanks, Tom.
Yeah, thank you, George. Good to hear from you. Jeremiah in, Coalport, Pennsylvania. Hey, Jeremiah, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I was disappointed when Bernie didn't get the nomination, but I'm going to vote for Biden. But I'm seeing on message boards and a bunch of Bernie supporters just say that they can't vote for Biden. So I was wondering if you had any idea, number one, how many Bernie supporters we could potentially lose, and number two, why don't Republicans have this problem? All their voters get in line behind whoever the nominee is. Yet, for some reason, every time we have this schism where we bicker back and forth, and then some people break off, vote green, or don't show up? Why do we have this problem?
Well, Republicans actually do have
it?
this problem. Yeah, Republicans do have the same problem of people who are disaffected or disenchanted, just not showing up to vote, or voting third party or whatever. But I think that this phenomena of Bernie supporters refusing to vote for Biden is wildly exaggerated. I've been watching on Twitter, and probably 9 out of 10 of the people who tweet at me about, I'm never going to vote for Biden because, this, that, or the other thing. He did this back in 1975 or back in 1986 or back in 2005, whatever the hell it is that they're, whining and complaining about. You look at their profile, and, they've been a member for 6 months, or at the most they've been a member for 5 years, which means they came in during the last election cycle, and they've got like 22 people following them. And I'm pretty sure that these are bots, they're trolls, they may be foreign bots and trolls. I think the whole phenomena is wildly exaggerated. I just I don't I've gotten one call since Bernie tossed in the rag or whatever since Bernie endorsed Joe Biden, or Bernie pulled out of the race. I've gotten one call from somebody saying I'm not going to vote for Biden, and I'm not sure that person wasn't a right-wing troll, because he never called this show before, and so may well have been a Republican. That's the message that they're spreading out there. So don't worry, Jeremiah. I think it's going to be fine. Did you know that Ronald Reagan committed treason to become president in 1980, and George Herbert Walker Bush was in on it, and he avoided being prosecuted for this in 1992 with a little help from Bill Barr? It's on page 116 of my book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Connie in Reno, Nevada. Hey, Connie, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Donald Trump has always wanted to be a mob boss anyway, so I say from now on we just call him Don Corona. I think that's appropriate.
I love it. Don Corona.
And the other thing is, aren't those meatpacking plants, aren't they the ones who were going to Mexico and advertising for help, encouraging illegals to come up?
Yes.
And I think this just shines a light on why we need to give even illegals health care. Those people could not go to the doctor and get help as soon as possible. Sure. And that's infuriating. So I just want to pass that on. Well, it's not only infuriating,
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, thank you, Connie. It's not only infuriating, it's also spreading disease. I mean, I've had no shortage over the years of right-wingers come on this show and try to tell me, liberal Democrats want to give health care to people who aren't even citizens of the United States. And I'm saying, well, if you were sitting next to one at a bus stop and they were coughing and we were in the middle of a tuberculosis epidemic, wouldn't you want them to have health care? At which point they usually go something like, we'll talk to you later. It's a public health issue. Come on, wake up, wake the hell up. John in New Orleans. Hey, John, what's up?
Oh, okay. I guess this is kind of a follow-up from the last time I called, which was last April, because we were talking about Linda McMahon, the wife of Vince McMahon, who owns WWE, and the deal was that Ron DeSantis in Florida just declared WWE an essential business after Linda McMahon used her super PAC to give a generous, $18.5 million. She's going to spend that much money in Florida to help Trump get reelected. So then I guess that's how much it costs to declare your business essential.
Yeah, apparently. John, I didn't know about the size of the donation. Linda McMahon was also in Trump's cabinet. I think she was the head of the Small Business Administration or something. Do you recall what job she had?
Yeah, because it was a small business, and before she transitioned over to the super PAC. Yeah, because small businesses have $18.5 million to donate.
Right. Every small business has their own super PAC. Amazing. John, thank you for sharing that. That was brilliant. Keno, our Republican buddy down in Lakeland, Florida. Hey, Keno, what's up?
Yes. Now, moose herder Republicans want to convert to Republicans for Biden, and I have a suggested branding message. The current Republican agenda consists of super favoritism for the super rich. This is producing unfriendly to citizens predatory capitalism, and Joe Biden will bring a friendly to citizens Nordic-style capitalism. What do you think, Tom?
I like it. Keno, I hope you can reach out to more Republicans, and I hope you get a good following for your Mooseheader Republican campaign. I think it's just marvelous. Thank you very much for the call. Patrick in Long Island, New York. Hey, Patrick, what's up?
Hey, Tom, I heard a lot of things today. Just to let you know, the death toll, what a terrible word. Death toll in New York dropped below 700 in a day for the first time. So that's an improvement. They're looking up, and, hopefully this will continue to decline. I wanted to say, as far as Greg Palast, I couldn't be more in step with him. This has been going on with Chris Kobach for 20 years now, since back in the 2000 election, and this is nonsense. This has been going on long enough, and as long as this goes on, the Republicans will have their toehold, and the dream of a progressive country will come to a screeching halt. And the other thing I wanted to make a comment on is that this is like Trump is like a cat with a mouse to play with. This is his dream scenario. He literally gets to choose who lives or who dies. And he enjoys that, and he thinks this is all a ratings grab, and who's going to have the greatest reality show.
I agree, Patrick. He is a psychopath. He's a sociopath, with evil tendencies, shall we say. Patrick, well said. Thank you. Gregory in Islington, South Carolina. Gregory, you're on the air.
Hey, Tom. I just wanted to say, first of all, yes, you take that break, my brave soldier, because we're going to need you for the long haul. With that said, I also wanted to say that a lot of people don't recognize what it takes for these immigrants to stay reclusive. After this Trump scare they've had, we now see that they're not going to go to the doctor. Like that woman was telling you before, they can't go to the doctor because why? Once they're exposed, then the doctor's asking, well, who are you around? So now you have that contact, what do you call it, contact tracing?
Contact tracing,
suddenly, so suddenly you have a community that's already scared and now is apoplectic. Okay?
Yeah, and especially if it's the federal government, coming in, their fear would be that ICE would be right behind them.
Exactly. So now, I'm a small farmer, and I'm serious. I am a small farmer. I am, but a minority small farmer, and I only say that because a lot of people do not see the value in farming. I was going to the farmer's market to sell some of my wares. Well, guess what? That's over with this year. Okay? I mean, it's just not going to happen. So the commercial farmers who once had, these immigrants working to harvest for them, well, they're not able to sell what they once were able to sell as well. Because the schools have closed, so they had to throw away their produce because their cows are still milking, the chickens are still producing eggs. Nowhere for it to go.
Yeah, I get it, Gregory. I got to run, but thank you. And thanks for introducing some humanity into this about these so-called illegals, these undocumented workers. It is such a tragedy what is going on in this country and has been for 3 years now. We'll be back on Monday. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. I encourage you to take at least a day that you don't watch the news. Take a break from it. Find some meaning somewhere else. And we'll be back on Monday, and I'll fill you in on everything that happened. Have a great weekend, and get out there, get active, tag You're It. We'll see you tomorrow. We'll see you on Monday.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.